What happened really was that there was this series of meetings at military and diplomatic levels. I think more than 50 meetings, and where we continue to insist that a solution can only be based on the status quo. That is the status quo of June 2020, when the Chinese made those intrusions and we had the Galwan incident, etc. So we basically stuck to our position, and Chinese must have tried very hard to justify their sort of position, but ultimately it probably didn't work. And today, of course, we are talking or hearing that there might be a return to the status quo, and China has made statements, etc., that yes, there is a resolution, and we will work together to implement that agreement. But let me also say that returning to the status quo cannot be 100%, because China has already built many military and other facilities, civilian facilities, after that incident of June 20. My question is, are they going to dismantle all those things, or is this status quo limited to the patrolling and other issues that the Chinese had sort of barring India from doing to what we consider our LAC, and they think that the LAC is further towards India. Those things are there, perceptual issues. And of course, this led to a complete disruption in a lot of things, visas, investments, etc., etc. So of late, you may have read about that India may be thinking or allowing more Chinese investments. But despite all this, the trade went on. China's intention was to put pressure on the border so that, and their argument was that border is a different issue, is a historical thing, left over from history, as they say. But we should carry on with our normal, bilateral intercourse in various domains. India was not willing to accept it. India said, without a border resolution, there will be no normalization. That was the bottom line. Hence, that is what you are seeing today, that after so many years, many rounds of negotiations, and maybe because of the BRICS summit, because the whole world is watching BRICS, and this is probably an opportunity where the two leaders meet. Maybe that also had something to do with this agreement to somehow resolve this issue. So I think those are the factors that I can think of.
Mr. Chakravarti, when the Prime Minister skipped the SAO in July, and remember, Xi Jinping was in attendance back then. It was very much reflective of the tensions that still exist between the two nations, as many experts were pointing out back in the day. But now that we see, a strong intent being displayed by both the countries in terms of this bilateral being finalized, the first strategic bilateral that is taking place post the Galwan skirmishes between President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Narendra Modi, is that not indicative in itself of how the two countries are wanting to move forward, move beyond what's happened the last 4 years?
Well, I think this is clearly reflective of the fact that is recognized that this is not a situation that should persist and should drag on. I think China has interests, even Russia has interest in getting India and China to work together and sort this out, because Russia is under a lot of pressure and sanctions, etc. And Ukraine, of course, is there. The Western countries are continuously, sending arms and ammunition and economic help to Ukraine to keep on fighting. So those are many of the other factors that must have led Russia to play, I believe, some kind of a mediating role here, because China also needs Russia, both need each other, and China is our largest trading partner. And also the fact, and I should bring it in here, is the problems that
organization of the 16th BRICS Summit. And once again, a warm welcome to all our new friends who have joined BRICS.
BRICS
विश्व की
In its new
40%
expanded
मानवता
formation,
और
BRICS
लगभग
accounts for
30%
40% of the
अर्थव्यवस्था
world's
का
humanity and
प्रतिनिधित्व
about
करता है।
30% of the global
पिछले लगभग 2 दशकों में ब्रिक्स ने अनेक उपलब्धियां हासिल की हैं। मुझे विश्वास है कि आने वाले समय में यह संगठन वैश्विक चुनौतियों का सामना करने के लिए और अधिक प्रभावी माध्यम बन करके उभरेगा। फ्रेंड्स, मैं न्यू डेवलपमेंट बैंक के अध्यक्ष हर एक्सेलेंसी दिल्मा रूसेफ का अभिनंदन करता हूं। पिछले 10 वर्षों में यह बैंक ग्लोबल साउथ के देशों के विकास के लिए महत्वपूर्ण विकल्प के रूप में उभर रहा है। भारत के गिफ्ट सिटी के साथ साथ अफ्रीका तथा रूस में रीजनल सेंटर्स के खुलने से इस बैंक की गतिविधियों को बल मिला है और लगभग $35 बिलियन के डेवलपमेंट प्रोजेक्ट्स सैंक्शन किए गए हैं। एनडीबी को डिमांड ड्रिवन सिद्धांत पर काम करते रहना चाहिए और बैंक का विस्तार करते हुए लॉन्ग टर्म फाइनेंशियल सस्टेनेबिलिटी, हेल्दी क्रेडिट रेटिंग और मार्केट एक्सेस सुनिश्चित करने पर प्राथमिकता रहनी चाहिए। फ्रेंड्स, नए स्वरूप में ब्रिक्स $30 ट्रिलियन से भी ज़्यादा बड़ी इकोनॉमी है। हमारे आर्थिक सहयोग को बढ़ाने में ब्रिक्स बिजनेस काउंसिल और ब्रिक्स विमेन बिजनेस अलायंस की विशेष भूमिका रही है। इस वर्ष ब्रिक्स के अंदर WTO रिफॉर्म्स, ट्रेड फैसिलिटेशन इन एग्रीकल्चर, रेजिलियंट सप्लाई चेन्स, ई कॉमर्स और स्पेशल इकोनॉमिक जोन को लेकर जो सहमति बनी है उससे हमारे आर्थिक सहयोग को बल मिलेगा। इन सब पहलों के बीच हमें स्मॉल और मीडियम स्केल इंडस्ट्री के हितों पर भी फोकस करना चाहिए। मुझे खुशी है कि 2021 में भारत की अध्यक्षता के दौरान प्रस्तावित ब्रिक्स स्टार्टअप फोरम इस वर्ष लॉन्च किया जाएगा। भारत द्वारा दिया गया रेलवे रिसर्च नेटवर्क का इनिशिएटिव भी ब्रिक्स देशों के बीच लॉजिस्टिक्स और सप्लाई चेन कनेक्टिविटी बढ़ाने में अहम भूमिका निभा रहा है। इस साल ब्रिक्स देशों में यूनिडो के साथ मिलकर इंडस्ट्री 4.0 के लिए स्किल्ड वर्कफोर्स तैयार करने पर बनी सहमति बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण है। 2022 में लॉन्च किया गया ब्रिक्स वैक्सीन R&D सेंटर सभी देशों की स्वास्थ्य सुरक्षा बढ़ाने में मदद कर रहा है। हमें डिजिटल हेल्थ में भारत का सफल अनुभव ब्रिक्स पार्टनर्स के साथ साझा करने में खुशी होगी। फ्रेंड्स, क्लाइमेट चेंज हमारी साझी प्राथमिकता का विषय रहा है। रूस की अध्यक्षता में ब्रिक्स ओपन कार्बन मार्केट पार्टनरशिप के लिए बनी सहमति का स्वागत करता है। भारत में भी ग्रीन ग्रोथ, क्लाइमेट रेजिलिएंट इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर और ग्रीन ट्रांजिशन पर विशेष रूप से बल दिया जा रहा है। इंटरनेशनल सोलर अलायंस, कोएलिशन फॉर डिजास्टर रेजिलिएंट इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर, मिशन लाइफ यानी लाइफस्टाइल फॉर एनवायरनमेंट, एक पेड़ मां के नाम जैसे इनिशिएटिव लिए गए हैं। पिछले वर्ष COP28 के दौरान हमने ग्रीन क्रेडिट जैसे महत्वपूर्ण पहल की शुरुआत की। मैं ब्रिक्स पार्टनर्स को इन इनिशिएटिव से जुड़ने के लिए आमंत्रित करता हूं। ब्रिक्स के सभी देशों में इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर के निर्माण पर विशेष रूप से बल दिया जा रहा है। भारत में मल्टी मॉडल कनेक्टिविटी को तेजी से बढ़ाने के लिए हमने गति शक्ति पोर्टल बनाया है। इससे इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर विकास के लिए इंटीग्रेटेड प्लानिंग और इम्प्लीमेंटेशन में मदद मिली है और लॉजिस्टिक कॉस्ट कम हुई है। हमारे अनुभव आप सभी के साथ साझा करने में हमें खुशी होगी। फ्रेंड्स, ब्रिक्स देशों के बीच फाइनेंशियल इंटीग्रेशन बढ़ाने के लिए प्रयासों का हम स्वागत करते हैं। लोकल करेंसीज में व्यापार और सुगम रूप से क्रॉस बॉर्डर पेमेंट से हमारा आर्थिक सहयोग सुदृढ़ होगा। भारत द्वारा बनाया गया यूनिफाइड पेमेंट्स इंटरफेस यानी यूपीआई भारत की एक बहुत बड़ी सक्सेस स्टोरी है। इसे कई देशों में अपनाया गया है। पिछले वर्ष हिज हाइनेस शेख मोहम्मद के साथ मिलकर हमने इसे यूएई में भी लॉन्च किया। अन्य ब्रिक्स देशों के साथ भी इसमें सहयोग किया जा सकता है। फ्रेंड्स, भारत ब्रिक्स के अंतर्गत सहयोग बढ़ाने के लिए पूरी तरह से प्रतिबद्ध है। हमारी विविधता और मल्टीपोलरिटी में हमारा दृढ़ विश्वास हमारी ताकत है। हमारी यही ताकत और मानवता में साझा विश्वास हमारी भावी पीढ़ी के समृद्ध और सशक्त भविष्य को सार्थक रूप देने में सहयोग होगा। आज की बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण एवं उपयोगी चर्चाओं के लिए मैं सभी का आभार व्यक्त करता हूं। ब्रिक्स के अगले अध्यक्ष के रूप में मैं राष्ट्रपति लूला को हार्दिक शुभकामनाएं देता हूं। भारत आपकी ब्रिक्स अध्यक्षता की सफलता के लिए अपना पूरा सहयोग देगा। एक बार फिर राष्ट्रपति पुतिन और सभी लीडर्स का बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
Спасибо большое, уважаемый господин премьер-министр.
Thank you very
Мы
much,
все говорим
distinguished
о
Prime
необходимости
Minister.
обеспечить
We all
высокие
talk
темпы
about the need to
экономического роста.
ensure high rates of
Вам
economic
это
growth,
как раз удается.
and you managed to do
Мы вас
that.
поздравляем
We
с этими
congratulate you on
результатами.
these results.
7,5% роста.
7.5%
Это
of
пример для
GDP.
All right, so we heard Prime Minister Narendra Modi's address there at the ongoing BRICS summit, and like we've been discussing, up next is the all-important bilateral between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Xi Jinping. But I want to quickly go across to Dr. Roxanne Zegon, geopolitical analyst with us on the broadcast. Dr. Roxanne, many thanks for taking out your time and speaking to us here on CNN News 18 at a very important time. Of course, we're emphasizing on the importance of BRICS, especially given that this is the first edition post the expansion in January this year. So, you know, interesting dynamics at play really if we talk about the 16th edition of the BRICS summit. But tell us about, you know, what you make of the summit taking place at a time that Russia is hosting this, Russia also sending out its own message to the world that, look, I don't stand isolated as a nation. I too have trusted allies. And of course, India's presence in terms of, you know, the Prime Minister once again using this platform to reiterate what India's stand on terror is, terror financing is, and most importantly, the war in Ukraine is, that the priority is to restore peace.
Yes, thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be able to join you today because I strongly believe that we're experiencing historical moments in Kazan now. And first of all, I would like to say that the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, has upbring a very important dynamism and new, fresh geopolitical energy by exposing not just a program or a strategy of development, by saying how important it is to be concerned in a collective way about the green agenda. I think the message is much more stronger. Today, we have witnessed how India has exposed its grand strategic vision. And Ukrainian crisis, it's only one of the elements of this exposure, because Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been claiming a lot of times while negotiating with Moscow and being in Kiev that India is standing strongly for the peace resolution. And this peace resolution stance is only one of the elements of this grand agenda, which is called Grand Bharat, because India truly matters. And today, after we have heard that great speech of the Prime Minister of India, we could feel and we could assess the grandeur of this happening.
Roxanne, also want to understand the Russian position on this. Of course, the fact that Russia is hosting the BRICS summit is interesting in itself at a time that, like we've been saying, that Russia wants to send out a message that the Western sanctions have barely had an impact, that, there's an alternative international order that can just pose a big challenge to the dominant Western order. That's what is being spoken of by several foreign policy experts. Do you align with that thought? Do you think that this could be an alternate order that perhaps the West must watch out for very closely?
As a person who has been spending for more than decades in geopolitical waters, I can say that today it's not the point of discussion about the fear of Russia in front of the Western allies. It's not about turning the page, a new geopolitical page. It's about upbringing a completely new narrative, a completely new vision, not only trying to separate the Western-oriented countries as a pool of geopolitical enemies of Russia, and on the other hand, Russia, which is trying to expose its support to the global South. What we are seeing today, from the geopolitical point of view, is that there is a serious attempt from the Russian side to send the message to the world that Russia is not a victim, is not trying to victimize its partners. Russia is following for the new agenda, for the new strategy of creating new visionaries, new allies, a new type of governance and leadership in the world.
Roxanne, I asked this because the member groups like China, Iran and Russia clearly have, a different agenda on their mind when they talk about West, when they think about West, when they try and take on the Western challenge. And wouldn't you say in that sense that the participation of these three nations now as part of the BRICS is going to be read as an attempt on these nations to be wanting to unseat, the Western order, the current international order?
When we talk about these three countries that you mentioned, we have to understand that while seeing the weakening of the political system and political governance of the West, there is no other option, there is no other lacune, they can join. And of course, BRICS appears as a great alternative for them. But at the same time, it's quite a challenging situation for them. I mean, it's not about changing the chairs in the theater or changing the dramaturgy, or scenario of geopolitical behavior. It's about a new trend that they are joining. It's the future. And everyone clearly understands that BRICS is the future.
Okay. All right. Very interesting that you say that, Roxanne. I also want to understand from you what you make of, the ongoing developments that have been taking place around India and China. Here in India, we've been tracking this very closely with regards to the fact that there is a certain agreement that India and China have agreed upon as far as patrolling along the line of actual control is concerned. And that in itself is a big breakthrough and perhaps has paved the way, as many say, for this bilateral that is all set to take place in about 15-20 minutes from now between President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Do you see Russia having played an important part in mediating these conversations?
I can confirm and I can assure you that Russia has truly played an important part in making India and China come together at the round table and discuss these challenging issues. That's absolutely without any doubt. Second of all, this breakthrough that we have witnessed will definitely be a promising opportunity for both parties to reflect their foreign policy strategy in consideration to all that old concerns that India used to have in concern of China and Chinese party in concern of India. And I think that BRICS is actually aimed at creating that kind of platform bridge of solving the old stifling problems of India and China. And I'm more than sure that the next step will be done in relation to Pakistan issue, because Pakistan is an ally of China and it plays a significant role in the foreign policy of China. And it takes a crucial role for Indian foreign policy as well. That's why I think that Russia has played a significant role in putting these two parties at the round table today.
Oh, very interesting. Roxanne, what we'll do is we'll head into a very short break, but stay on with us. We'll come back to you in just a bit. There's lots more to talk about, given that that bilateral between President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Narendra Modi starts in about 15 minutes from now. We head into a very short break. For now, we'll be right back with lots more on the other side. Narendra Modi will meet with President Xi Jinping today. This, of course, on the sidelines of the BRICS summit. Currently, the plenary session is underway where BRICS leaders are present. A short while ago, BRICS family photo was also taken, and we've been keeping up with those visuals coming in from Kazan in Russia. Now, the upcoming Modi-Xi meeting today marks the first face-to-face encounter between the two leaders since 2019. This was much before the Galwan episode, remember. Notably, this is the third time India and China have addressed border issues ahead of a multilateral summit, having done so in 2017 and 2022 as well. While specific details of the agreement remain undisclosed, it aims to prevent future clashes and return troops to their positions before the 2020 standoff. After 51 meetings at diplomatic and military levels, Prime Minister Modi's push for de-escalation is gaining traction. However, geopolitical experts remain cautious. They say the real test will be whether China upholds this new agreement. So there's a lot of caution that India continues to exercise. But before we talk about the several aspects of the bilateral that's to take place later this afternoon, I want to go across to my colleague Siddhant joining us with more details. Siddhant, tell us what we're learning in the latest from the BRICS summit. We have the plenary session currently underway. Very powerful images that have constantly been coming to light, including, that firm gesture on part of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. What's going on? What can you tell us?
Right now we're getting to know from our sources that the restricted format plenary session is going on, and after which Prime Minister could likely make an intervention at the plenary session. Now all the leaders have already arrived at the venue, and in fact there was a group photograph, family photograph also of the BRICS family, and in fact Prime Minister Modi could be seen standing next to President Putin, and on the other side, Chinese President Xi Jinping was standing. Perhaps a very powerful message that these three leaders are sending out to the world, to the Western world especially. Also, in fact, let's draw the viewers' attention to the photographs which has been released by the BRICS Secretariat yesterday, in which the three of these leaders, the founding members of BRICS, having a candid moment and enjoying concert in Kazan. Those were the really powerful photographs, and perhaps that is how President Putin wanted the BRICS to happen, because it's an opportunity for President Putin, because he wanted this platform, he wanted this global platform to send a message to the West that look, the West, as West was trying to corner President Putin, but the message is that my partners and my friends are still very much with me, and look, all have arrived to attend the BRICS summit. Also, also, the one message which in fact India would also be willing to give, especially in these times when, the difference with the West is perhaps making headlines, that as far as the border issue is concerned with China, in fact, the other issues, the payment mechanism, the trade, transport corridors, maritime domain, we have our own ecosystem, we have our own grouping, which is called as BRICS. India is the founding member of BRICS. The entire economy of the BRICS nation surpasses the combined economy of the G7 countries. The BRIC countries represent more population and perhaps also the aspirations of the countries from the global south. So that is also the message which India would like to send to the world, that when it comes to the border issues, we discuss it on a one-to-one basis bilaterally. We don't go to the multilateral forums, and ahead of any summit we resolve those issues. And that is exactly what is happening today, as Prime Minister Modi is going to meet President Xi Jinping later in the day, and after which the patrolling arrangements could get announced by both the sides. So it's a lot of messaging, lot of optics, and this particular optics will perhaps work in India's favor. And also for the multipolar world, this was something which one geopolitical expert told me a few days back, that for a multipolar world, a strong Russia is very important. And India is perhaps walking on that path, that a weaker Russia will always tilt more towards China. A stronger Russia is important for India and is in India's interest. And also if India talks about multipolarity, then for a multipolar world, a strong Russia is very, very important. And India believes in that. And this is a reason that despite so many sanctions, despite so many countries coming forward to speak against Putin and Russia for the war in Ukraine, India continued buying oil from Russia, because India believes in multipolarity, and India also knows that a weaker Russia will tilt more towards China. And to maintain the multipolar world, a stronger Russia is very, very important. And this is the reason that Prime Minister Modi is in Kazan today. Perhaps he had a chat with President Putin yesterday, the bilateral meeting both leaders had, after which he met Iranian President Pezeshkian.
Welcome back. Thanks for staying tuned to CNN News 18. And we're counting down to that all-important bilateral scheduled to take place between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping in minutes from now. A first of its kind after 5 long years. But we just heard Prime Minister Narendra Modi a short while ago address the summit. And we, in fact, prior to that, heard comments made by Chinese President Xi Jinping as well. In fact, Xi Jinping advocated for stronger economic ties within the alliance. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who spoke after him, spoke of the manner in which India has made progress and what his vision for the BRICS grouping really is. He spoke of emphasizing the green growth, green transition, spoke of India's experience in digital health. And of course, the big message that came in once again from Prime Minister Narendra Modi on how this is not an era of war. That was once again reiterated during the BRICS summit. I want to go across to my colleague Siddhant Mishra, who's joining us with more details. Siddhant, first up, tell us, how soon can we expect the bilateral between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping to commence?
Well, that's right. So in some time from now, in fact, both leaders are going to meet on the sidelines of the 16th BRICS Kazan summit. And in fact, the two sessions, one, the initial session and the second one, the extended format sessions, have got concluded. In fact, in both the sessions, Prime Minister Modi addressed the world leaders, BRICS leaders, perhaps about the global challenges and how BRICS needs to be prepared for the future. Prime Minister also thanked the world leaders for the contribution to the BRICS forum, and also the effort that the world leaders are giving to make BRICS an influential grouping to solve the global crisis, global challenges. Prime Minister will meet President Xi Jinping, and after which there's going to be the press conference which Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri will hold, and perhaps that press conference is going to be very, very important because that will be the first time that Indian side may talk officially, giving more details about the arrangements that have been made between India and China, because till now they have not divulged the details of the arrangement. So since once the meeting between both leaders will take place, after which the Ministry of External Affairs will come up with more details about the arrangement, and after which Prime Minister will inflame for New Delhi. So it was a short but a very impactful visit of Prime Minister Modi to Russia. It was his second visit this year, and because in the month of July he visited Russia on a state visit, and this time he is in Kazan for the BRICS summit. India is the founding member of the BRICS. Perhaps India has a lot of responsibility also as far as integration of new members in BRICS is concerned, and also there are 40 new applications for the BRICS summit. So, India is a key deciding country when it comes to giving the membership to any other country. So, BRICS is perhaps emerged as a counterweight to G7, and also, the way the world leaders are projecting their presence at the BRICS summit is perhaps in a way could be seen as a message to the Western world that, there's also one grouping which accounts for 30% of the global economy, 40% of the global population, is perhaps can solve the issue global crisis. And also this BRICS represents the aspirations of the countries from the global south, and this is the reason that the venue has been very strategically chosen by Russia, Kazan. Now, Kazan is a place has been chosen by President Putin because this place is also to do outreach with the Muslim world. At the same time, reflecting upon the aspirations of the countries from the global south. So it was a very high octane, action-packed BRICS summit and Prime Minister's visit to Kazan. But all eyes are going to be on the President Xi and Prime Minister Modi's visit, the meeting, which will take place after 5 years. Last both leaders met in 2019. There has been brief conversation between the two leaders on the sidelines of one of the multilateral summits, but no bilateral meeting took place. So today it's going to take place maybe 5 to 10 minutes from now, and a very significant one, perhaps a groundbreaking, and since both countries have come to a breakthrough as far as border standoff is concerned, Demchok and Depsang defection points are concerned, both sides have agreed for the fresh patrolling arrangements. And it's a big victory for Indian diplomacy also, because from last 4 years there have been more than 51 meetings between both India and China. NSA Doval met Wang Yi in Moscow about a month back. EM.S. Jaishankar met Wang Yi twice after June this month, and there were a lot of emphasis from the Indian side to resolve this border issue, and India's position was very clear from day one that there cannot be any other issue discussed unless the border issues are resolved. So this is like opening a Pandora box now. Since the border issues are resolved, both leaders are meeting. We could also look for a possibility of resumption of direct flights to China. Also, the trade could flow in, the money could flow in from China in form of FDI, FIIs, and also we could see more Chinese companies investing in India. So that could be the roadmap ahead once the two leaders will meet today in Kazan. So it is not only about the border issue getting resolved, but because the border issue is getting resolved, the other doors, the other domains, the space which were closed after the 2020
And most certainly
Galwan.
this bilateral is in line with that all-important announcement that's been made by the Indian side as confirmed by China. And of course, diplomatic and military negotiators are to be credited with this big breakthrough. Siddhant, we'll come back to you in just a bit, counting down to that all-important bilateral. Heading into a very short break. We'll be right back.
Onto the fly.
Narendra Modi will meet with President Xi Jinping today. This, of course, on the sidelines of the BRICS summit. Currently, the plenary session is underway where BRICS leaders are present. A short while ago, BRICS family photo was also taken, and we've been keeping up with those visuals coming in from Kazan in Russia. Now, the upcoming Modi-Xi meeting today marks the first face-to-face encounter between the two leaders since 2019. This was much before the Galwan episode, remember. Notably, this is the third time India and China have addressed border issues ahead of a multilateral summit, having done so in 2017 and 2022 as well. While specific details of the agreement remain undisclosed, it aims to prevent future clashes and return troops to their positions before the 2020 standoff. After 51 meetings at diplomatic and military levels, Prime Minister Modi's push for de-escalation is gaining traction. However, geopolitical experts remain cautious. They say the real test will be whether China upholds this new agreement. So there's a lot of caution that India continues to exercise. But before we talk about the several aspects of the bilateral that's to take place later this afternoon, I want to go across to my colleague Siddhant joining us with more details. Siddhant, tell us what we're learning in the latest from the BRICS summit. We have the plenary session currently underway. Very powerful images that have constantly been coming to light, including, that firm gesture on part of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. What's going on? What can you tell us?
Right now, we're getting to know from our sources that the restricted format plenary session is going on, and after which Prime Minister could likely make an intervention at the plenary session. Now, all the leaders have already arrived at the venue, and in fact, there was a group photograph, family photograph also of the BRICS family, and in fact, Prime Minister Modi could be seen standing next to President Putin, and on the other side, Chinese President Xi Jinping was standing. Perhaps a very powerful message that these three leaders are sending out to the world, to the Western world especially. Also, in fact, let's draw the viewers' attention to the photographs which has been released by the BRICS Secretariat yesterday, in which the three of these leaders, the founding members of BRICS, having a candid moment and enjoying concert in Kazan. Those were the really powerful photographs, and perhaps that is how President Putin wanted the BRICS to happen, because it's an opportunity for President Putin, because he wanted this platform, he wanted this global platform to send a message to the West that look, the West, as West was trying to corner President Putin, but the message is that my partners and my friends are still very much with me, and look, all have arrived to attend the BRICS summit. Also, the one message which in fact India would also be willing to give, especially in these times when the difference with the West is perhaps making headlines, that as far as the border issue is concerned with China, in fact the other issues, the payment mechanism, the trade, transport corridors, maritime domain, we have our own ecosystem, we have our own grouping which is called as BRICS. India is the founding member of BRICS. The entire economy of the BRICS nation surpasses the combined economy of the G7 countries. The BRIC countries represent more population and perhaps also the aspirations of the countries from the global south. So that is also the message which India would like to send to the world, that when it comes to the border issues, we discuss it on a one-to-one basis bilaterally. We don't go to the multilateral forums, and ahead of any summit we resolve those issues. And that is exactly what is happening today, as Prime Minister Modi is going to meet President Xi Jinping later in the day, and after which the patrolling arrangements could get announced by both the sides. So it's a lot of messaging, lot of optics, and this particular optics will perhaps work in India's favor. And also for the multipolar world, this was something which one geopolitical expert told me a few days back, that for a multipolar world, a strong Russia is very important. And India is perhaps walking on that path, that a weaker Russia will always tilt more towards China. A stronger Russia is important for India and is in India's interest. And also if India talks about multipolarity, then for a multipolar world, a strong Russia is very, very important. And India believes in that, and this is a reason that.
Welcome back. Thanks for staying tuned to CNN News 18. And yes, we're counting down to that all-important bilateral that's set to take place between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the BRICS summit. We've already heard from the Prime Minister talk about the vision India has as far as this grouping is concerned. But I want to quickly go across to Zaka Jacob, who joins me in the studio. As you know, we're really talking, Zaka, about what we can expect from this bilateral that is taking place after 5 long years. We've seen casual pull-asides between the two leaders, but the manner in which MEA has made some very important points, the big breakthrough that's been seen between the two nations at the LAC, is in fact indicative of the manner in which the two nations have decided to take this equation forward in a positive manner now.
Well, look, I think Jaishankar had said this some months ago, that until the situation of the border was resolved, until the situation of the border went back to what it was pre-2020, then the relationship itself will not be normal. He had in fact called it an out-of-normal relationship or an abnormal relationship. And the reason for that was because of the changed situation of the border. So the first step towards restoring some degree of normalcy, some degree of pre-2020 status quo has been announced. A couple of days ago, you heard the Foreign Secretary saying that the last two holdout points, disengagement has been achieved and a patrolling arrangement or a patrolling agreement has been arrived at between India and China. Now, the question is, what are the contours of that patrolling arrangement? We don't know, the bare bones details of it. For example, before 2020, in a place like Dapsang, Indian troops could go all the way up to a point called patrolling point 12, and the Chinese troops would come all the way up to a patrolling point 4. Are we going back to that position? Is there now a new modus vivendi that will be operational in Dapsang? What about these buffer zones, the 5 other areas where there were these friction points, whether it was Galwan, Gogra, Hot Springs, etc.? Those places, they had created buffer zones, but in Dapsang and Demchok, which were the last two holdouts, which predate 2020. Clashes in Dapsang, for example, happened first in 2013. Clashes in Demchok happened first in 2014. So what is the new modus vivendi that has been arrived at? We don't know the details of it, but the very fact that Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping will be meeting for the first standalone bilateral in 5 years. The last time they met was in 2019 in Mahabalipuram, and you had that photo op. They were at the rock caves and by the seashore and so on. There was a lot of optics around it. And within 6 months of that meeting in October 2019, you had the Chinese trying to unilaterally change the status quo. It started in April of 2020 at the height of COVID, and then in May there was a big clash, and the biggest one, of course, happened in Galwan in June 2020, in which 20 Indian soldiers died and an unspecified number of Chinese soldiers died. That was very clear that the modus vivendi and the agreements between India and China, some of which had lasted 20, 30, 40 years, were all completely broken. China had decided to unilaterally change the status quo. And, the funny part is we don't even know 4 years down the line, 4.5 years down the line, why China did so. What we do know is after 4 years of hard bargaining, and let's give credit where it's due, multiple rounds of talks between the foreign ministers, the WMCC, which is the working mechanism, met 31 times between Beijing and New Delhi. The corps commanders, the 14 Corps commander who was leading from the Indian side, they met 21 times. So 52 rounds of negotiations have happened just at those two levels, the WMCC and the Corps commanders. And then, of course, like I said, number of occasions where the foreign minister has met his counterpart, the NSA has met his counterpart, all of which led to the breakthrough that happened earlier this week. And that has now paved the way for the meeting between the principals, the first meeting between the principals in 5 years. Now, whether Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping will, discuss the nitty-gritties of what is the new modus operandi in Dapsang and Demchok, I don't think so. I don't think the principals get down into that kind of, nitty-gritties or the details. That's left to the respective delegations to work out. What I do expect them to announce, and we will get to know once the Foreign Secretary has a briefing later on before the delegation leaves back for New Delhi, is what is the directional thrust or push that is being given by both leaders. Are both leaders signaling to their respective teams and in fact to their respective countries that we're willing to put this pretty nasty episode of the last 4 years, 4.5 years behind us, and we want to sort of move forward with a new template, with a new modus vivendi, and we want to look at the big picture. So I wouldn't be surprised if you see directionally what is the vision for both Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping as far as the India-China bilateral is concerned. You would, and I would expect to see some kind of announcements on the trade, economic, investment side. Again, in broad details, I don't think either of the principals will get into the details, but in broad terms, you can expect them to say something about investment, about trade, about greater engagement between two neighbors and so on. But I think there is a greater sort of question or a greater cloud that sort of hangs over the bilateral. That is, on the one side, India has to find a way to live with China without having 50,000 troops on either side of the line of actual control. That is a necessity of the relationship, because as Pranab Mukherjee said, the late Pranab Mukherjee said, you can only get to choose your friends, you can't get to choose your neighbors. Fact is, China and India are neighbors. You have to find an operating mechanism where you don't have to have 50,000 troops, standing in an eyeball-to-eyeball confrontation on either side of the line of actual control, and find a working mechanism which can stand the test of time. We had the 1993 agreement, we had the 1996 agreement, which have stood the test of time for 30, 40 years, until 2020 happened, until China unilaterally changed that status quo. So you can disengage. I think that process is now complete. The next step is going to be de-escalation. And then finally, you have the de-induction or the demilitarization. Can both sides get to the point where they can see, okay, we've now found a new working mechanism. This is our new working mechanism. Therefore, we do not have to have 50,000 troops on those icy heights. We can call the troops back to the barracks. Can they move in that direction? If signally, if at least in directional terms, if we get a signal or two from both Prime Minister Modi and from President Xi Jinping, I think that will give you an idea of what is going to be the future trajectory of this relationship, at least for the foreseeable future.
You're absolutely right in pointing out, Zaka, that this hasn't happened overnight. In fact, the military and diplomatic negotiators have to be given all the credit. But let's talk about Russia here and the possible role Russia may have played in ensuring that this bilateral today becomes a reality. What is in it for Russia to ensure that this summit is a successful one? Where do you think Russia is coming from essentially here? Because, here's the thing. Russia, Iran, China, all part of BRICS alongside India, they will want to send out a message to the Western nations, especially the United States of America.
Oh, yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think the fact that the Prime Minister separately, aside of BRICS, met with the Russian president, the Iranian president, both of them yesterday, and today will be meeting the Chinese president, will be watched very closely in Washington. It'll be watched very, very closely in Ottawa, in London, in Canberra, because I think India is also trying to send out a signal that, look, we have friends in the West and we value those strategic partnerships. Certainly, we value the strategic partnership with the United States, but it's not like we're putting all our eggs in that one basket. We have friends in other parts of the world as well. And I think, at one level, there is an inherent contradiction. How can India, for example, be part of the Quad, which, even if they don't say it explicitly, let's face it, the singular purpose of the Quad is to try and ensure free and fair and open Indo-Pacific. And the only country that is an impediment to that is China. So the Quad, the very reason for the Quad coming into existence was to try and keep a check on China. So India is one of the four sort of founder members of the Quad. And also India is now a founder member of BRICS. I mean, the very idea of BRICS was an economic arrangement, it was a term that was coined by a famous Goldman Sachs economist 20 years ago to describe back then what were the four fastest growing economies in the world. Today, these are not the 4 or 5 fastest growing economies. India is, but China is not. China has slowed down quite substantially. Even in South Africa, in Russia because of the war, growth has substantially spilled, but it's not fallen off a cliff, which is what the United States and its Western partners, NATO allies, were hoping that once the war began, and because it had become almost like an existential sort of question for Ukraine and for the very idea of NATO, for the very idea of European integration, they thought that Russia would collapse, that Russia will not be able to keep up either the war machine or, more importantly, would not be able to keep up its economy going. But fact is, we're 2.5 years, we're going to fast approach the 3rd year of this war, and Russia is very much there. So I think for the Russians, it is to signal to the West that, look, we are very much around. We are an important pole in the evolving sort of tide of geopolitics. Russia and China have become increasingly close in the last 3 years since this war in Ukraine began. You are seeing, and I hate to use the word camps or, back what we saw in the Cold War, but we're essentially moving to a two-block world. You'll have a US-led Western order, and you will have a bloc of Russia and China who do not want that Western-led order, do not want that US-led order. They want to change that global order. The question is, for countries like India, who have interests in both of these camps, we can't afford to choose one over the other. The question is about of a balancing act. How far can you have, one foot in each boat, as it were, or how far can you go along to be part of every conversation, or at least have your representative in every room where conversations are happening? Now, to the people who say, look, BRICS inherently is a contradiction because you have countries like Russia and China, which are non-democratic. You have countries like Brazil, South Africa, India, which are democracies. And now you have a whole bunch of new members, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Iran. I mean, I can't think of another multilateral arrangement where Iran and Saudi Arabia are sitting across the table. But BRICS, in that room in Kazan, you saw the leader of the UAE, you saw the leader of Saudi Arabia, and you saw the president of Iran sitting across the dialogue table. So I think as far as India's strategic autonomy, and this is a much used and perhaps even abused phrase, as far as India's strategic autonomy is concerned, India would want to be part of every room where there is a conversation. India would not want to be isolated and said, okay, we will only be in those rooms where the United States is there, or its NATO partners are there, or where Asian countries like Japan or South Korea are there. India wants to be in every room where conversations are happening. With China, despite all the troubles that we're seeing on the border, trade is still huge with China. We traded end of 2023 $130 billion with China. China still, at least as far as goods merchandise is concerned, continues to be India's largest trading partner. So you can't just wish that away overnight. What I do think we will see at the end of that meeting between Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Modi is, are you going to see an easing up on the trade relationship, on the investment relationship? For example, Chinese companies, for them to invest in India after 2020 and after Galwan, the news was really tightened. Do you see a little bit of opening up of that? Because there has been pressure from industry as well. If you go back and look at the Chief Economic Advisor's report, which came out before the budget earlier this year, he was very clear that he does foresee Chinese investment as a way to try and normalize the relationship. Of course, there was a lot of blowback to that report as well. But I think directionally, at least on the trade and economy front, you're moving towards that direction. You may not see an opening of the purse strings right away, but at least you'll get a directional signal from both the principals that they want to move in the direction of greater Chinese investment, of course, with all the caveats of national security and scrutiny and all of that added. But I think you will see a little bit more of the easing of Chinese investment into India.
India, in fact, is pretty much attempting to strike that balancing act, Zaka, because on one hand, India continues to maintain that this is not an anti-West grouping, that this summit needs not be looked at, with that intent. On the other hand, you have the Prime Minister just a short while ago say that we believe in multipolarity. So that's where you're perhaps coming from. But I also want to understand from you whether you think when the Prime Minister says that there can't be any double standards for terror funding, that's a veiled attack at China, you think? And what kind of an impression does that send out to China just ahead of the bilateral that's to take place?
Well, India has had concerns about China, particularly its meddling in Pakistan, its sort of funding, if you will, or its support tacitly or otherwise to Pakistan-based terror groups that are inimical to India. But I think that is just one part of the relationship. I think Prime Minister, ever since he came to office in 2014, has been talking about this, the adoption of the comprehensive instrument on terrorism. This is something that the United Nations Security Council has to do. I don't see the political will across nations to try and implement that, the comprehensive agreement on terrorism, to have a common definition for what constitutes terror. But I think that's just one small part of the relationship. Remember, even the Chinese have had their fair share of troubles with Pakistan-based terror groups. Just recently, we had the attack outside the Karachi airport, which was specifically targeted at Chinese companies, at Chinese employees. A few of them died as well. You have had cases in Balochistan, projects that China was undertaking in Balochistan, which was targeted again by Baloch groups. So I think the Chinese also understand that terrorism is something that needs to be dealt with. They do that in Xinjiang, in the Uyghur-dominated areas. There have been, for example, the East Turkestan groups that are supported and emanate from Pakistan, which have been a bit of a pain, a bit of a problem for China. They have dealt with that in Xinjiang as well as in some parts of Tibet, etc. So that's just one part of the relationship. I think really when Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping sit down today in that room in Kazan for the bilateral, I think a couple of factors need to be kept in mind. Number one, the very fact that this is the first time in 5 years that they're meeting. And the reason why they didn't meet was because, as External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar keeps saying, this is not a normal relationship. This has become an abnormal relationship. And until you resolve the situation at the border, you cannot expect other parts of the relationship to acquire a semblance of normalcy. And I think that's what the Chinese wanted. The Chinese wanted to say, let's keep the border aside. Yes, there are inherent problems there. There are inimical problems there. Let's keep that aside. There's so much else to this relationship that we can correct and that we can, put back on the right track. But India said, no, that's not how we view it. For us, what happened in June in 2020 was a fundamental reorientation of the relationship, was a fundamental break from what was the status quo in the relationship. And until that gets fixed, India's position was very clear. We cannot have or focus on the other parts of the relationship.
Right.
So I think that has sort of seeped through to the Chinese, at least the first step of it, which is this engagement. Like I said, this is still very much unfinished business. You still have a long ways to go when it comes to de-escalation, de-induction, demilitarization, and we'll see. I mean, the devil really lies in the detail.
The devil indeed lies in the detail. Zaka, going to request you to stay with us. A very warm welcome to all our viewers. They're watching Nation at 5 with me, Akanksha Swaroop. All eyes are on Kazan. Will India and China be able to ease their tensions at the icy frontier? Remember, it's been 4.5 years since relations between Beijing and New Delhi have been extremely frosty. 5 years since Xi Jinping of China and Prime Minister Modi of India had their last bilateral or a structured discussion. On that note, Zaka Jacob continues to stay with me. Let me quickly go back to Zaka, but important to highlight the fact that today's bilateral will be marking a breakthrough and a thaw as far as relations between Beijing and New Delhi are concerned. Remember, it was 4.5 years ago when we saw the clashes happen at Galwan, as Zaka has also been highlighting that was the defining moment when the status quo in fact sort of only downgraded and things went downhill between both the countries. But ever since, we've seen multiple rounds of diplomacy and military level engagements which have now taken India and China to this level where they are now willing to be at the talking table. Of course, much has to be attributed to Russia as well, where remember this bilateral is taking place in Kazan during that BRICS summit. On that note, let me quickly go across to Siddhant Mishra, who's been tracking the developments for us. Siddhant, we heard what Zaka has also been talking about. Much changed in the year 2020. But remember, people are also asking the question that prior to that informal summit that took place between Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Modi, which is when we saw them have that bilateral and an informal summit, the meeting that took place 5 years ago, we'd also seen a Doklam clash in the year 2017. Yet Prime Minister Modi was present in Wuhan. Yet you had that summit in Mahabalipuram. What happened in 2020 that in fact led to a point of no dialogue for India and China?
Well, this has been a debate from quite some time, that what happened in 2020 was perhaps somewhere a miscalculation by China, and perhaps that also led to India's increased closeness with the Western world. Maybe now China has realized that, it's a time to correct that miscalculation, because look, one thing cannot be denied, that Chinese economy is poorly performing. There is also pressure on the Chinese government to open up trade with India so that, the trade can flow from both sides. That would benefit both the economies. In fact, there was a lot of pressure also from the Chinese side on the Indian side to talk on other bilateral issues, including trade, etc. But Indian side has always been consistent with one position, which was that there cannot be any other bilateral issues discussed unless the border issue gets resolved. So now, because Indian side was adamant, Indian side did not, listen to what Chinese have been demanding. They had to come to the terms, the conditions which was set by the Indian Times. First border talks, then any other bilateral issue, and that's what even we have been reporting. It's a victory for the Indian diplomacy.
All right, many thanks to you, Siddhant, for bringing in all those inputs. Let me quickly introduce our guests today. I'm also joined in by Tara Kartha, who's the former director of the NSCS, Dr. Roxanne Zingon, who is the geopolitical analyst, both of them joining us on that broadcast. At the same time, let me inform all our viewers that bilateral, much-awaited one should be happening any time from now. In fact, let me quickly bring in Tara. Tara, there's been a lot of talk and chatter about what one can expect from the bilateral. Much of it was also given away by Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri when he made that announcement about India and China, in fact, arriving upon that agreement. But what is it that you would be looking for?
I would be looking for some measures which create trust. I mean, I'm looking in forward in terms of what can trust and verify. You know, you can't just have an agreement and say, okay, the agreement is done and we are done and dusted. So it's what can we do in going, because they also need to see what's on our side of the border. We need to see what's on their side of the border. How are we going to build on that? What are the technical ways we can build on that? But essentially, I mean, I'm sorry to pour some cold water on this whole thing, is that there is, just yesterday, I think the Chinese president, day before yesterday, had said, we are prepared for war. The whole Taiwan thing is going very, very, high in terms of their firing, in terms of all that going on. So I think that is one of the things probably driving this relationship. They are looking for peace on this side. And if Taiwan gets any worse, they don't want India jumping into the US fold.
Right. Just as perhaps India would not like interference coming in from China, especially when it comes to our own territorial integrity and, of course, the issue of Kashmir. But having said that, let me also bring in Dr. Roxanne. Dr. Roxanne, how much has changed in terms of the geopolitical climate ever since we saw Prime Minister Modi and President Xi share that very warm moment, that kind of camaraderie in Mahabalipuram, when all those photographs are now coming back out of those archives to only remind what India and China are still capable of. But much has changed after that meeting that took place 5 years ago in Mahabalipuram in India, and of course we've seen how India has also warmed up to the United States. We've seen the kind of overtures that have been made. We've seen the tensions grow between Taiwan and China, where we've seen the United States also, in fact, become a major talking point as far as tensions in the South China Sea are concerned. So I'd like to have a word from you in terms of all that's changed in the 5 years that have gone by.
Thank you very much for your question. From the geopolitical point of view, I have been expecting that kind of moment, that kind of breakthrough that we're witnessing today in Kazan for quite some time. However, we have to understand an important issue. That when BRICS, as a new geopolitical format, has emerged, has appeared in 2006, there have been a lot of speculations from the Western side about fears, how this format will be developing, that format has been lacking a certain geopolitical agenda and has been experiencing for quite a long time inconsistency. What we can see after a decade of development, we see that we have reached a new step, a new level of geopolitical detension, because we understood that the amount of the confrontational elements, the amount of conflicts that have been growing not only on the Western Hemisphere, but as well in the Asian Pacific region, a high level of militarization, a high level or a great tendency towards confrontation and fake distribution of power has been at stake. But before we will start talking about the third step of development of BRICS, which I actually consider as a triangle emergence, Russia, India, and China, That's the next step. Before that triangle will emerge in all its angles, in all its capacity, definitely today we have to pass through the successful experience of bilateral negotiations. And what India and China has reached today, it's a historical and geopolitical important moment.
It certainly is, but we'll also have to wait for what comes out of that bilateral meeting. Having said that, let me quickly go back to Tara. Tara, let's also discuss in terms of how West will be keenly watching this moment, because remember, it does seem like the West has been rattled, because as far as the UN Secretary General's decision to be part of the BRICS summit is concerned, we've seen that's really not gone down well with the West, especially with the Ukrainian foreign minister coming out and in fact protesting that presence of the UN Secretary General. Having said that, we've seen that despite the arrest warrants being issued by the ICC, you have had Vladimir Putin, in fact, organize this massive summit with 36 members, one, in fact, that is only expanding each year. What is the message being sent out to the West? And before, in fact, I'd also like to finish by saying that Prime Minister Modi said that this is not a grouping which should be seen as an anti-Western one, but one that is non-Western.
Yeah, that message is very strong, right? Here is this person who has been indicted as as the international warrant and all that stuff, and he's sitting and talking to all these world leaders. But please remember, Russia has its own economic groupings like the Eurasian Union. Who even knows about that? Do you track Eurasian Union? You don't. This BRICS is important because one of the world's largest economies, China, is on it, and India. We are the two largest economies. That's why BRICS is important. And all the others who've come on board, like Saudi Arabia, which is extremely important because it's an energy provider. And everybody's looking at alternatives, to the Western domination. And there's a bit of, sort of tiresome about saying, let's not choose sides, it's the US or China. We can be both, right? But there is no doubt whatsoever that every single handshake, every single smile will be analyzed right down to the bottom by analysts in the West. They're not very comfortable with India and China getting together on the same side. But they also know, the ones who know the situation are aware that our relationship with the US is, despite all the Panun and Gurpatan and all that stuff, is far more layered. There's so many areas we're working together. And it's not all anti-China. In fact, hardly anything is anti-China. It's all things which left like Atmanirbhar in terms of technology, all that is going on a lot with the US and with other countries in Europe. So there's really no comparison. And the central message, if you saw, what Prime Minister Modi said was that please stop the war in Ukraine. That is something even the West wants, though they may not say it. So you have literally a foot in all camps, which is what we should do. What Foreign Minister Jaishankar said, we look after our interests, period. Whichever, country it is. And if India and China can cooperate in a trustful manner, you can actually change so much. You can even change the financial systems. That is what the West is scared of.
And that's very interesting because, the Iranian President Pezeshkian, he himself made that point that we do not want to go by what the United States is preaching. It's talking about totalitarianism, whereas we are somebody who believe in multilateralism. And perhaps that's very interesting because that's what Prime Minister Modi has been saying throughout. But how far can India, in fact, maintain that kind of status quo as far as our position in a multipolar world is concerned? I'm going to request you both to continue staying with us as I slip into a quick break. More news and updates will be following, but remember, it is our live and rolling coverage on that much awaited Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Modi's bilateral.
Narendra Modi will meet with President Xi Jinping today. This, of course, on the sidelines of the BRICS summit. Currently, the plenary session is underway where BRICS leaders are present. A short while ago, BRICS family photo was also taken, and we've been keeping up with those visuals coming in from Kazan in Russia. Now, the upcoming Modi-Xi meeting today marks the first face-to-face encounter between the two leaders since 2019. This was much before the Galwan episode, remember. Notably, this is the third time India and China have addressed border issues ahead of a multilateral summit, having done so in 2017 and 2022 as well. While specific details of the agreement remain undisclosed, it aims to prevent future clashes and return troops to their positions before the 2020 standoff. After 51 meetings at diplomatic and military levels, Prime Minister Modi's push for de-escalation is gaining traction. However, geopolitical experts remain cautious. They say the real test will be whether China upholds this new agreement. So there's a lot of caution that India continues to exercise. But before we talk about the several aspects of the bilateral that's to take place later this afternoon, I want to go across to my colleague Siddhant joining us with more details. Siddhant, tell us what we're learning in the latest from the BRICS summit. We have the plenary session currently underway. Very powerful images that have constantly been coming to light, including, that firm gesture on part of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. What's going on? What can you tell us?
Right now, we're getting to know from our sources that the restricted format plenary session is going on, and after which Prime Minister could likely make an intervention at the plenary session. Now, all the leaders have already arrived at the venue, and in fact, there was a group photograph, family photograph also of the BRICS family, and in fact, Prime Minister Modi could be seen standing next to President Putin, and on the other side, Chinese President Xi Jinping was standing. Perhaps a very powerful message that these three leaders are sending out to the world, to the Western world especially. Also, in fact, let's draw the viewers' attention to the photographs which has been released by the BRICS Secretariat yesterday, in which the three of these leaders, the founding members of BRICS, having a candid moment and enjoying concert in Kazan. Those were the really powerful photographs, and perhaps that is how President Putin wanted the BRICS to happen, because it's an opportunity for President Putin, because he wanted this platform, he wanted this global platform to send a message to the West that, look, the West, as West was trying to corner President Putin, but the message is that my partners and my friends are still very much with me, and look, all have arrived to attend the BRICS summit. Also, the one message which in fact India would also be willing to give, especially in these times when the difference with the West is perhaps making headlines, that as far as the border issue is concerned with China, in fact the other issues, the payment mechanism, the trade, transport corridors, maritime domain, we have our own ecosystem, we have our own grouping which is called as BRICS. India is the founding member of BRICS. The entire economy of the BRICS nation surpasses the combined economy of the G7 countries. The BRIC countries represent more population and perhaps also the aspirations of the countries from the global south. So that is also the message which India would like to send to the world, that when it comes to the border issues, we discuss it on a one-to-one basis bilaterally. We don't go to the multilateral forums, and ahead of any summit, we resolve those issues. And that is exactly what is happening today, as Prime Minister Modi is going to meet President Xi Jinping later in the day, and after which the patrolling arrangements could get announced by both the sides. So it's a lot of messaging, lot of optics, and
Welcome back, and thank you for staying with us here at Nation at 5. Remember, we are bringing you all the live and latest visuals coming in from Kazan. Remember, Prime Minister Modi has also addressed that plenary session, where he's also made a very strong point when it comes to tolerating terrorism. He said that there should be no room for terrorism as far as BRICS, the grouping, is concerned. How is this now playing out geopolitically, the entire BRICS summit? We'll have to see, because remember, our top focus is also also on that much awaited bilateral that's taking place between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping of China, one that's happening after 5 years. Much has changed ever since the two met 5 years ago, in fact, in Mahabalipuram in Chennai. And ever since, they've only met twice for pull asides, one that happened during the G20 summit in Indonesia, not to forget the fact that President Xi Jinping himself gave a miss to the G20 summit that was organized by New Delhi last year. So relations have been frosty, but shortly before the Prime Minister, in fact, left for BRICS, India and China managed to strike an agreement that is to resume patrolling on the friction points along the LAC. What this is now going to mean, let's quickly go across to Tara, who continues to stay with us. Tara, I'd like to know from you, when it comes to the nitty-gritties of that entire agreement that's being talked about. Vikram Misri, in fact, did confirm that we will be resuming the status quo that goes back to the year 2020. What will it be that you'll be looking for as far as the entire design of that agreement is concerned? Does it also mean that we can expect Depsang and Demchok also to be included in the new agreement?
I think as far as what has come in the media, it does seem to me that way. I mean, if Depsang is included, that's quite a huge thing, right? If it is, especially in that Y junction, if you're going to be patrolling again, that is, it's a huge step forward. But like I said, we'll have to wait for details of the ground. I think even the foreign minister hadn't really given us any details on that as to exactly how is this happening. But if you say back to 2020, then it implies that, right? But like I think I have mentioned
Depsang and Demchok, Tara, go back to the year 2013, and that's why India and China have been calling them legacy issues. Will they be able to sort of resolve that Sino-India territorial dispute of Ladakh that goes all the way back to 2013? I think is going to be that big question we'll be looking for to be answered during the bilateral of today.
No, you obviously need to resolve that, but that's going to be, there's a perception of LAC, right, by the two sides. So as long as that perception is maintained in terms of patrolling, you're okay as of now. Going forward is different. But what I'd like to remind you is that there's been a lot of Chinese and us, of course, both sides have built up infrastructure a lot in the border areas. And for China, obviously, it's a lot easier because they are in a plateau area, right? And one of the things I mentioned earlier was there's this big settlement coming up about 38 kilometers east of Pangongso. And what is that? Is that going to remain? As far as I'm aware, that is going to be a sort of a relocation point. That is huge. There is a massive geo-int facility of Shigatse. It's huge. So there's each time you've known that each time you've had a friction point, you disengage, and then China builds up over there. That happened in Doklam. It's happening now in Pangongso, in Ladakh. So even if your troops were to disengage, it is much easier for China to bring up its troops than it is for us. Having said that, of course, we've got a lot more experience in mountain warfare. The Indian Army is amazing in that respect. But like I said, these are all things that you have to consider going forward. So,
right.
I would assume.
Tara, I have to slip into a quick break, but before I do that, I'd also like to take in a quick word from you in terms of how much do you place on the role of diplomacy and military level talks that have perhaps culminated into this bilateral that we are seeing today.
Oh, it's amazing diplomacy on both sides. It's not just Indian, right? It is also their side which has come forward. Everybody's done a bit of give and take. It's a lot of work. I think, in fact, it went on for nearly 2 years. This has been going on for a long time. So it was supposed to have broken in the last summit. It didn't. And this time, finally, it has come through. So I think both sides can actually congratulate themselves on having come thus far. Now it is for each army to take it forward. The diplomats have done their job. Now the security people have to handle it bit by bit on the ground. That's a pretty tough task.
Absolutely. I think de-escalation and then, of course, they're going to be looking at demilitarization. Many thanks to you, Tara. I'm going to, in fact, request you to continue staying with us. But for now, it's time to slip into a quick break. Don't go anywhere. Stay tuned to Nation at 5.
Narendra Modi will meet with President Xi Jinping today. This, of course, on the sidelines of the BRICS summit. Currently, the plenary session is underway where BRICS leaders are present. A short while ago, BRICS family photo was also taken, and we've been keeping up with those visuals coming in from Kazan in Russia. Now, the upcoming Modi-Xi meeting today marks the first face-to-face encounter between the two leaders since 2019. This was much before the Galwan episode, remember. Notably, this is the third time India and China have addressed border issues ahead of a multilateral summit, having done so in 2017 and 2022 as well. While specific details of the agreement remain undisclosed, it aims to prevent future clashes and return troops to their positions before the 2020 standoff. After 51 meetings at diplomatic and military levels, Prime Minister Modi's push for de-escalation is gaining traction. However, geopolitical experts remain cautious. They say the real test will be whether China upholds this new agreement. So there's a lot of caution that India continues to exercise. But before we talk about the several aspects of the bilateral that's to take place later this afternoon, I want to go across to my colleague Siddhant joining us with more details. Siddhant, tell us what we're learning in the latest from the BRICS summit. We have the plenary session currently underway. Very powerful images that have constantly been coming to light, including, that firm gesture on part of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. What's going on? What can you tell us?
Right now, we're getting to know from our sources that the restricted format plenary session is going on, and after which Prime Minister could likely make an intervention at the plenary session. Now, all the leaders have already arrived at the venue, and in fact, there was a group photograph, family photograph also of the BRICS family, and in fact, Prime Minister Modi could be seen standing next to President Putin, and on the other side, Chinese President Xi Jinping was standing. Perhaps a very powerful message that these three leaders are sending out to the world, to the Western world especially. Also, in fact, let's draw the viewers' attention to the photographs which has been released by the BRICS Secretariat yesterday, in which the three of these leaders, the founding members of BRICS, having a candid moment and enjoying concert in Kazan. Those were the really powerful photographs, and perhaps that is how President Putin wanted the BRICS to happen, because it's an opportunity for President Putin, because he wanted this platform, he wanted this global platform to send a message to the West that, look, the West, as West was trying to corner President Putin, but the message is that my partners and my friends are still very much with me, and look, all have arrived to attend the BRICS summit. Also, the one message which in fact India would also be willing to give, especially in these times when the difference with the West is perhaps making headlines, that as far as the border issue is concerned with China, in fact the other issues, the payment mechanism, the trade, transport corridors, maritime domain, we have our own ecosystem, we have our own grouping which is called as BRICS. India is the founding member of BRICS. The entire economy of the BRICS nation surpasses the combined economy of the G7 countries. The BRIC countries represent more population and perhaps also the aspirations of the countries from the global south. So that is also the message which India would like to send to the world, that when it comes to the border issues, we discuss it on a one-to-one basis bilaterally. We don't go to the multilateral forums, and ahead of any summit, we resolve those issues. And that is exactly what is happening today, as Prime Minister Modi is going to meet President Xi Jinping later in the day, and after which the patrolling arrangements could get announced by both the sides. So it's a lot of messaging, lot of optics, and
Welcome back, bringing you all the latest that's coming in from the ongoing BRICS summit in Kazan. We're bringing you breaking inputs. We're now learning that the Kazan Declaration is being adopted. This is the big breaking input we are bringing to you. Remember, this declaration is going to be extremely interesting to watch out, because remember, it was on January 1st this year that the BRICS was expanded. How was it expanded? Well, you have new members including Egypt, Ethiopia, even UAE, and most importantly, Iran, which were made members of the BRICS this year. And so after the expansion of the BRICS, we are having this summit, and now we are learning that the Kazan Declaration has been adopted. It would be interesting to see what emerges out of the Kazan Declaration. Remember, in the political backdrop of the ongoing wars, whether in Ukraine or the disturbances in West Asia, we will have to see what this Kazan Declaration in fact offers, and how is this taking the overall outlook of the BRICS forward. Would be an interesting one to watch out for. But remember, it is this year that Russia is playing host to the BRICS summit, not to forget the fact that it is happening in Kazan, and a very strong message going over there to the West, which has been perhaps threatened by the dominance that the BRICS has brought to the table of not just South Asia, even West Asia. In fact, joining me with more inputs is Siddhant Mishra. Siddhant, what are you learning in terms of the Kazan Declaration? How is this now going to take the BRICS agenda forward?
Well, Kazan Declaration is very, very important because this is happening in Russia's presidency, and there were a lot of agenda which were put on table today when leaders sat for the two plenary session. One was the open plenary session, the other was the extended format plenary session, and each side had come up with the ideas, with the agendas, and in fact, for Russia, it was very significant because President Putin has been cornered by the Western world. This was the platform which he got to perhaps project himself as the world leader, and also to prove to the Western world, to show the Western world that how his partners and friends are still with him. There are many agendas which we have been told could be the part of the Kazan Declaration. One could be the progress made on the payment mechanism, which was perhaps in the pipeline. There could also be the alternate payment mechanism that we could get to here once the details of the Kazan Declaration will come out. It would also be interesting to see that what would be how the paragraph on the Russia-Ukraine conflict has been framed in this declaration, and crisis on Middle East was also on the agenda. Also, supply chain is an issue which was discussed. Then the aspirations and the concerns of the countries from the global south, the funds that the banks have given, $35 billion, as Prime Minister Modi also reiterated the other day, that the banks have decided to give it to the countries from the global south for the development. So we could hear on that as well. Then climate is also one important issue which would be addressed in this Kazan Declaration. So in a way, it is seen as the counterweight to G7. 40% of the world population represents 40% of the world population, 30% of the global economy, and also the kind of projection, Akanksha, that these leaders have been doing since yesterday. All three leaders, the way the BRICS Secretariat released those photographs are something perhaps which also establishes that BRICS 2024 revolved around three personalities, three world leaders: President Putin, Prime Minister Modi, and President Xi Jinping.
Very interesting to, in fact, note. Let's have a walk around the newsroom as we speak, Siddhant. Right. Let's also talk about the dominance of the dollar, which is also being challenged through this BRICS summit, because remember, it's also been highlighted how in fact, shortly before the summit took underway, President Putin had talked about how the United States uses the dollar for its political purposes, which he also sort of calculated and equated with a political vendetta, because every time they sanction a country, say China or even Russia, it becomes difficult for them to trade. Henceforth, to now challenge the dollar is becoming increasingly important for Asian countries.
Well, yes, de-dollarization is an idea which has been put in the pipeline. Now, there are other mechanism which these countries are working on right now. Now, in fact, ahead of the summit, when President Putin was asked about the one currency for the BRICS member countries, to which he said that it will take a time. The time is not right now. It will take some more time. But when it comes to the alternative to the SWIFT mechanism, SWIFT payment mechanism, that is perhaps the biggest issue that Russia is facing right now. Because even if India is buying oil from Russia, then at times payments are made in yuan, so that Russia can buy things imported from China. Then there are special accounts that have been opened in India for the payment. So the payment mechanism for Russia is not smooth. So BRICS want an alternative payment mechanism, so that even if Western would sanction not just Russia, any other country tomorrow, then they should have the other mechanism for the payment, and their trade can happen smoothly. Now with Russia, the Iran is the other country which is a member now, is heavily sanctioned by the West. So that is the main issue that that Russia has perhaps brought to the table. So that could be that must be the part of the Kazan.
Many thanks to you, Siddhant, for bringing in those inputs. On that note, let me quickly go back to Tara Karta, who continues to stay with us. Tara, taking that discussion forward on de-dollarization. Many, in fact, economists are saying that despite the sanctions, they've not been able to really rattle the Russian economy, which is still thriving because of its dominance in the energy sector. Having said that, it is also one country that is now trying to de-dollarize or sort of challenge the dominance of the dollar. Could I have a word on with regards to that?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not an economist, right? So, but I'm just watching Saudi Arabia here, because that was the most significant thing. I think it was last year where they said we'll pay in, we won't use dollars for payment of our oil, and that the whole dollar is hinged on that's why you call it petrodollars. It's hinged on the trade of this Saudi oil and thereafter weapons exports to Saudi Arabia. So it's a nice, very cozy deal which the US got for itself. Saudi Arabia has not broken away, but it is using yuan as well. It is using, so that is going forward cautiously. But that doesn't mean that it's a complete de-dollarization. As of now, the US is still an extremely powerful economy on the world stage. So it's not going to be that easy. The point, however, is that whether, we want to do it or not, I'm not so sure that India would want that. Because
Tara, I'm so sorry to interrupt you there. My apologies over to you, because we are getting in breaking inputs. In fact, we are now learning that the bilateral between the Chinese President Xi Jinping and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is currently underway in Kazan as we speak. This is the big breaking input that we are bringing to you. Why does it matter so much? It's happening after 5 years. It was only 5 years ago that the two heads of state, in fact, had their last structured discussion, and that was in Mahabalipuram in India. And soon after, there were clashes in Galwan, which led to that standoff at the LAC. There was, of course, a situation of no dialogue, and today much is being placed on that bilateral between Beijing and New Delhi as it takes place in Kazan. Let's quickly go across to Siddhant, who will bring us more inputs. Siddhant, those images coming in, of course, speaking volumes for themselves. I think before we deep dive into the dynamics of this bilateral and how it's finally taking place, important to also give credit to the Russian president and Kazan for being able to manage this big breakthrough.
Absolutely, it's a messaging. If we look at it very minutely, then this particular discussion, the talks at core commander level, at the diplomatic level, has been going on from last 4 years, but there was no breakthrough achieved as far as Fiction Point of Dipsang and Demchok are concerned. And in fact, the forces were on the standoff mode. But this announcement has happened ahead of the BRICS summit in Russia. Perhaps look at this way, Akanksha, that India and China are meeting in Russia. So, it sends out a very strong message to the West also that we have our own grouping, we have our own ecosystem, we have our own mechanism to come to any understanding, to resolve issues, and we can do it on our own. That is a message, perhaps, as you rightly pointed out, President Putin wants to send out by bringing both India and Russia in China together for a bilateral meeting in Kazan. Also, interestingly, Akanksha would again like to draw viewers' attention to the photographs that was released by BRICS Secretariat yesterday. Putin in between, on the right Prime Minister Modi, and on the left is Xi Jinping.
And that's how they were seated at the gala dinner also.
Yes, that was a sitting arrangement at the gala dinner, and that was a sitting arrangement today at the plenary session also. So it's the messaging from the Putin that I can also resolve the issues. I can, if not directly, then also I can provide a platform. BRICS is also a grouping where ice breaking also takes place. It's not only about the multilateral issues, but if two countries from the same grouping have bilateral issues, they can also come up for the discussions and they can resolve the issues.
You know, that's a very interesting point that you're making, which is why I want to bring you in. Look at the kind of the way BRICS has united various countries, because if you see, you have an Egypt and Ethiopia, you have India and China, you have Iran in the backdrop of all these tensions that is taking place. So important to also share with regards to how BRICS is also playing a very unifying role.
Absolutely, Akanksha, very, very unifying role, and also very interesting to highlight here that even at the peak of standoff and differences with China, India never skipped BRICS meeting, because India's position has been very clear that India is the founding member of BRICS, and India has a responsibility to represent the aspirations of the countries from the global south, and B, also to use this platform best in its own national interest. That is also an idea, and that is exactly what India is doing today. India is using the grouping which was formed by India in the best of the possibility in its own national interest ahead of the summit. Look at the chronology, Akanksha. Foreign Secretary comes, announces that there is an arrangement made, patrol arrangement made between the two sides. Complete silence as far as the Chinese side is concerned. The time Prime Minister Modi touches down in Kazan, the announcement comes from the Chinese side. Yes, there is a solution found between the two countries. Late in the evening, Foreign Secretary again confirms that there is meeting which is going to take place between the two leaders. So a grouping which was founded by India, a grouping which India has found is now witnessing the closure of the standoff between the two countries, and also the arrangement has been found between the two countries, and now both leaders are meeting. Akanksha, this is just a beginning. There are two views to it. One, many are looking at it with a lot of suspicion that why China is doing right now, because the economy is performing poorly. There's pressure on the Chinese government also to open up trade, etc., etc. But also the achievement for the Indian diplomats, because their position has always been consistent that no other bilateral issues will be discussed unless the border issues get resolved. And it's a win for Indian diplomacy, and also the core commander level multiple meetings that took place, that China has to come to the conditions set by India. And now we could look at a possibility of opening of direct flights, investments flowing from China, FDI, etc., etc. A lot many things can happen after these two leaders will meet. Their meeting will get over in some time from now. This is what we have been told, and now the meeting is going on in Kazan.
Absolutely, we'd in fact be awaiting what in fact emerges out of that bilateral meet. But let me also bring in Tara on that note. Tara, for all those skeptics who are going to be very carefully watching how this bilateral pans out, I think that skepticism is also perhaps a very valid one, where we've seen how India has in fact managed to bestow and place trust as far as Beijing is concerned, but we've seen how we've also been sort of backstabbed when it comes to all those LAC clashes that have taken place. But remember, the line that we've also been talking about is that if India and China could manage those informal summits even after Doklam back in the year 2017. Can this bilateral engagement actually foster better ties between Beijing and New Delhi? And perhaps it's this bilateral, which is a result of consistent diplomacy and as far as military level, core commander level engagements that have been taking place in the last 2.5 years have in fact culminated into this bilateral that's taking place between President Xi Jinping and the Indian Prime Minister. But how far will this bilateral go? Will this sort of seal the deal when it comes to de-escalation and demilitarization de-escalation at the LAC? That's a question we are going to be looking for as far as answers are concerned. Siddhant is back with us.
Yes.
Siddhant, I think if one were to expect, we are going to be looking at perhaps also other answers, whether it is going to be Depsak and Demchok also included in that agreement. Because remember, the Chinese stance so far has been that Depsang and Demchok are two friction points which predate 2020 and that these are legacy issues and should not be included along with the clashes of 2020.
So, Akanksha, right now we have a very little detail about the arrangements, but we have managed to speak to our sources in the government. So, basically, there could be a possibility. We are still awaiting official confirmation from the government of the troops being pulled out of their current position and moving back to the pre-2020 positions, as you rightly pointed out. Then there could also be the possibility of two sides patrolling twice a month. Each side has to inform the other side before going on patrols. There's going to be the limited number of personnel in the patrolling company. So these are some basic details that we have managed to gather. We are still trying to get it confirmed officially from the government of India, and maybe today at the press conference, which Foreign Secretary will do right after this meeting, we could expect that that after the press conference, we could expect that Foreign Secretary will give out some more details as far as this particular meeting is concerned, and also the contours of the arrangement that have been made between India and China.
Right. At the same time, let's also talk about how much India could stand to gain by resuming dialogue, because many were saying that India and China both stand to lose. You rightly highlighted how the Chinese economy is in the dumps, and they've also sort of been brought down on their knees to such a situation where they are also pressured into resuming dialogue. Having said that, in terms of trade, what does India stand to gain? Because remember, China is also one of our largest trade deficit partners when we talk about the trade between India and China.
That's absolutely right, Akanksha. But the biggest, I would say, what would work in India's favor once this entire standoff will end and the tensions and there would be a de-escalation would be the FDIs flowing from China. Now, there are a lot of Chinese companies which want to invest in India, and in fact, I would also like to highlight here that this year's annual financial report perhaps supports the FDI from China. That report spoke in favor of the FDIs from China, and that was also, Akanksha, at that time was seen as a signaling from the Indian side that yes, we are ready to do things with China. We are ready to talk the other issues, but first the border issue needs to be resolved. And the good thing here is, Akanksha, that winters is coming. Now at least our Jawans, the troops, will be back to the original positions where they were, which is more, in fact, comfortable and better than where they are right now. So it's a big relief for them as well.
All right, many thanks to you, Siddhant, for sharing in those extensive inputs. But we can tell our viewers that right now that much-awaited bilateral between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping is currently underway. We'll be bringing you our live and rolling coverage from Kazan minute by minute. Stay tuned to Nation at 5.
Narendra Modi will meet with President Xi Jinping today. This, of course, on the sidelines of the BRICS summit. Currently, the plenary session is underway where BRICS leaders are present. A short while ago, BRICS family photo was also taken, and we've been keeping up with those visuals coming in from Kazan in Russia. Now, the upcoming Modi-Xi meeting today marks the first face-to-face encounter between the two leaders since 2019. This was much before the Galwan episode, remember. Notably, this is the third time India and China have addressed border issues ahead of a multilateral summit, having done so in 2017 and 2022 as well. While specific details of the agreement remain undisclosed, it aims to prevent future clashes and return troops to their positions before the 2020 standoff. After 51 meetings at diplomatic and military levels, Prime Minister Modi's push for de-escalation is gaining traction. However, geopolitical experts remain cautious. They say the real test will be whether China upholds this new agreement. So there's a lot of caution that India continues to exercise. But before we talk about the several aspects of the bilateral that's to take place later this afternoon, I want to go across to my colleague Siddhant joining us with more details. Siddhant, tell us what we're learning in the latest from the BRICS summit. We have the plenary session currently underway. Very powerful images that have constantly been coming to light, including, that firm gesture on part of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. What's going on? What can you tell us?
Right now, we're getting to know from our sources that the restricted format plenary session is going on, and after which Prime Minister could likely make an intervention at the plenary session. Now, all the leaders have already arrived at the venue, and in fact, there was a group photograph, family photograph also of the BRICS family, and in fact, Prime Minister Modi could be seen standing next to President Putin, and on the other side, Chinese President Xi Jinping was standing. Perhaps a very powerful message that these three leaders are sending out to the world, to the Western world especially. Also, in fact, let's draw the viewers' attention to the photographs which has been released by the BRICS Secretariat yesterday, in which the three of these leaders, the founding members of BRICS, having a candid moment and enjoying concert in Kazan. Those were the really powerful photographs, and perhaps that is how President Putin wanted the BRICS to happen, because it's an opportunity for President Putin, because he wanted this platform, he wanted this global platform to send a message to the West that, look, the West, as West was trying to corner President Putin, but the message is that my partners and my friends are still very much with me, and look, all have arrived to attend the BRICS summit. Also, the one message which in fact India would also be willing to give, especially in these times when the difference with the West is perhaps making headlines, that as far as the border issue is concerned with China, in fact the other issues, the payment mechanism, the trade, transport corridors, maritime domain, we have our own ecosystem, we have our own grouping which is called as BRICS. India is the founding member of BRICS. The entire economy of the BRICS nation surpasses the combined economy of the G7 countries. The BRIC countries represent more population and perhaps also the aspirations of the countries from the global south. So that is also the message which India would like to send to the world, that when it comes to the border issues, we discuss it on a one-to-one basis bilaterally. We don't go to the multilateral forums, and ahead of any summit, we resolve those issues. And that is exactly what is happening today, as Prime Minister Modi is going to meet.
Welcome back. The bilateral between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping is currently underway in Kazan, and joining me live from the studio is Zaka Jacob. Zaka, not only is this historic because it's the first bilateral in 5 years, but one that is also arriving after China confirmed that LAC agreement. What is it that India would be looking to in terms of their own interests?
Well, I think the foreign minister has said that pretty explicitly, that we need to go back to the pre-2020 status quo, which is that there were military confidence building measures, there was a military modus vivendi that existed along the line of actual control, even though the 3,500 kilometer long LAC in large parts is disputed, it's not demarcated. But despite that, we did not have a military incident, the kind of which we saw in 2020. Prior to that, the last firing incident was in 1986 when the Samudra-Chu incident happened, and that was a lone incident, that was an isolated incident. Whereas what happened in Galwan in June 2020, there were 2-3 months of build-up of Chinese troops, and it was China unilaterally deciding to change the status quo at the height of COVID, at a time when the world was really grappling and figuring out how to deal with this once-in-a-generation pandemic. At that time, for the Chinese to send 20, 30, 40,000 troops to try and forcibly alter what was a 40-year-long consensus and a modus vivendi on how to deal with each other's patrolling, each other's troops, each other's disputed claims, and so on and so forth, that had completely been appended by China in a unilateral fashion. And for the last 4.5 years, India has stuck to its ground, saying that look, these are friction points, and until you resolve these friction points, we cannot pretend like the rest of the relationship is normal. So, which is what the Chinese wanted. They wanted to say, okay, let's put the border problem in a box. Let's address everything else, trade and investment and Indian Ocean region and all of this, perception that India is moving to a US-led bloc and all of that. Let's deal with all of those problems and then let's leave the border aside because it's vexed, it's a contentious issue. And to that, the External Affairs Minister has said on a number of occasions, this is not a normal relationship. You cannot go back to a normal relationship until you fix the abnormality at the border. And I'm glad to say that with the announcement that happened on Monday from the Foreign Secretary, we have taken perhaps the first step to moving back towards a normal relationship, moving back towards what was a pre-2020 status quo. Now, all that has been said by the Indian side, both the Foreign Secretary first and then later the Foreign Minister, was that a patrolling arrangement has been arrived at. So, which means that in Depsang and Demchok, which were the two last holdout areas, the Indian and Chinese troops have agreed to a patrolling arrangement. Now, the pre-2020 position was in Depsang, for example, the Indian troops would go all the way to a place called patrolling point 12. The Chinese troops would come all the way to a patrolling point 4, a patrolling point 3. Are we going back to such an arrangement, or are we going back to an arrangement that we've seen in other places which were also friction points where disengagement has happened, Gogra or Hot Springs or other friction points where now we've created buffer zones? So are we going to see buffer zones in Demchok and in Demsag? That is the question. So we don't know the details of it. We don't know the bare bones details of what is this new modus vivendi, what is this new patrolling arrangement that's been arrived at. And that, by the way, is just the first step. There are still two more steps to go, which is de-escalation and then finally the de-induction of troops, the demilitarization of these areas, which means you don't have to have 50,000 troops on either side in those icy heights in an eyeball-to-eyeball confrontation. So we're about a third of the way in, but it is a good start because, like I said, for the last 4 years plus now, this issue had fundamentally held up the bilateral relationship. In fact, there was no meeting between the two principals for the better part of the last 5 years because of what China did in Galwan and in these other friction points in the summer of 2020. We are now sort of turning the page on that after 4 long years.
Having said that, it's interesting that you talk about the biggest roadblock being these clashes and the friction points along the LAC. But what about surveillance concerns which have now risen in the IOR or the Indian Ocean region, where we do see China consistently sending its warships? Should we also expect China taking a step back when it comes to the Indian Ocean region?
No, I don't think so. I don't think, at least if you were to speak to folks in South Block, the core issue was always the LAC. I mean, that is the divide. That is the disputed sort of 3,500 kilometer boundary between, which is undemarcated, which is disputed between both sides. That is the core issue as far as India is concerned. Indian Ocean region is an important security concern, no doubt about it, but it is not just India's concern. There are other countries around that ring which have a far graver problem with China. Look at Philippines, for example. Every week there is news of a Chinese Coast Guard vessel or a naval vessel ramming into a Philippine fishing boat, right? So those are other countries that have territorial claims and disputes with China in the South China Sea. And for that, India has realized that the better way to deal with that is to have multilateral fora or arrangements like the Quad, for example. So you have India, Australia, Japan, because all of these countries are affected by Chinese hegemonic behavior in the Indo-Pacific. And I keep saying this again and again. The reason why the Quad came into existence was to ensure a free and open Indo-Pacific. And you can't do that if you're just one country. You have to sort of join forces, and the Quad is perhaps the best illustration of trying to make the Indo-Pacific free and fair. But as far as the core interest is concerned, the line of actual control, that is not a fight that America can fight for New Delhi. That's not a fight that Japan can fight for New Delhi, or South Korea can fight for New Delhi. That is a fight that India has to fight. And I'm glad to say, I think the evidence or the lesson that we can learn from the last 4 years is India got dealt a bad hand. You had the Chinese come in unilaterally, forcibly, militarily try to change the status quo. We lost 20 soldiers in Galwan. But the good news is India held on to its positions. India did not concede an inch. It matched Chinese troop for troop and maneuver for maneuver. And in fact, what we saw in late 2020 when India occupied the Kailash Ranges and then forcibly got China to go back from the Pangong Tso, I think was an illustration of just how much invested India is in protecting its borders and protecting its positions on the line of actual control. It has taken a long time. It has taken 31 rounds of meetings of the WMCC, the working mechanism, 21 rounds of meetings between the corps commanders, multiple rounds of talks between the foreign minister and his counterpart, the NSA and his counterpart. And finally, after 50 plus meetings, we're here. We've just crossed the first step, which is that all 7 points of friction, we now have disengagement, but there is still a long ways to go.
Absolutely. Quite a long way to go over there. Many thanks to you, Zaka, for putting that entire discussion into perspective for us. But as Zaka has been highlighting, that there's also the need for de-escalation and subsequently disengagement as far as the military deployment of the various troops is concerned. But not to forget the fact that both the countries only stand to gain once there is disengagement and peace at the borders. Because remember, China is one of India's largest trading partners, as we've also been discussing earlier, that it also happens to be one of our biggest trade deficit partners, and perhaps India can also look towards correcting that trade deficit. On that note, let me also bring you those reactions from the Indian Prime Minister as he addressed two very keynote sessions at the BRICS summit. And with that, it's a quick wrap from my end. Thank you so much for watching Nation at 5.
मैं न्यू डेवलपमेंट बैंक के अध्यक्ष हर एक्सेलेंसी दिल्मा रूसेफ का अभिनंदन करता हूं। पिछले 10 वर्षों में यह बैंक ग्लोबल साउथ के देशों के विकास के लिए महत्वपूर्ण विकल्प के रूप में उभर रहा है। इस साल ब्रिक्स देशों में यूनिडो के साथ मिलकर इंडस्ट्री 4.0 के लिए स्किल्ड वर्कफोर्स तैयार करने पर बनी सहमति बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण है। भारत में भी ग्रीन ग्रोथ, क्लाइमेट रेजिलिएंट इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर और ग्रीन ट्रांजिशन पर विशेष रूप से बल दिया जा रहा है। भारत द्वारा बनाया गया यूनिफाइड पेमेंट्स इंटरफेस यानी यूपीआई भारत की एक बहुत बड़ी सक्सेस स्टोरी है। इसे कई देशों में अपनाया गया है। मैं न्यू डेवलपमेंट बैंक के अध्यक्ष हर एक्सेलेंसी दिल्मा रूसेफ का अभिनंदन करता हूं। पिछले 10 वर्षों में यह बैंक ग्लोबल साउथ के देशों के विकास के लिए महत्वपूर्ण विकल्प के रूप में उभर रहा है। इस साल ब्रिक्स देशों में यूनिडो के साथ मिलकर इंडस्ट्री 4.0 के लिए स्किल्ड वर्कफोर्स तैयार करने पर बनी सहमति बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण।
Good evening. You're watching Plain Speak with me, Poonam Burde. World leaders converged in Kazan and Russia for the BRICS summit in a bid to realign the world order that is dominated by the West. At the plenary that was held a short while ago, Prime Minister Modi sent out an unambiguous message to those present and also to those who are eyeing an entry in this grouping. He said that there is no place for double standards on issues like terrorism and terror financing. He also spoke of radicalization among youth and the grouping needing to take steps to prevent just that. This message comes at a time when expansion of BRICS is on the agenda and Pakistan is pushing forward with its long-standing bid for a BRICS membership. That perhaps set the tone for what was to come right after that on the docket for the Prime Minister, a sit-down with China which is currently underway. A bilateral meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping comes after 5 years after they last met. It also comes 4 years since the two countries were engaged in the worst clash that India and China have seen at the line of actual control. Now, ties have been frosty since 2020. Not long ago, if you remember, External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar has said that ties were significantly disturbed since China's unilateral overture in eastern Ladakh. But with disengagement now at the line of actual control, that deal being done and diplomacy playing its role at the highest levels, ties seem to be on the mend. Stable relations are very much needed for both countries because it is in the benefit of both those countries to have stable bilateral ties and also have a stable neighborhood. Because that's exactly what we're looking at, a stable Southeast Asia, Indo-Pacific, even though China does not like that term, is required, and for that, India and China have to be at peace. Trade is continuing, of course, between the two countries. That will only boost economies on both sides, and both countries need that to stay. A unified fight for the global south is also what's required, especially at a time when China is trying to realign itself, trying to be the leader of the pack as far as a global realignment is concerned. It also strengthens civilizational connect between the two countries, and there are many aspects of that. Infrastructure development is also what collaboration is being looked at, and both countries could benefit in terms of development as well. But can China be trusted? To say the very least, India has to be wary of Beijing and its misadventures because they've done many of them in the past. 1962 still remains China's biggest betrayals as far as India is concerned. China continues to claim Arunachal as disputed territory or as its own and renames villages that are very well within India's territory. China on many occasions has violated policy with stamped visas to Arunachal residents. This despite India raising a protest, lodging a strong one multiple times. Closer ties with Pakistan. Remember, China and Pakistan are fair weather allies. They want to try and contain India, which is also why we see a fight on both the frontiers as far as India goes. That's also something that India needs to be wary of. The growing influence on Nepal is a concern for India. There's trouble that's fomenting in Bangladesh, in another country in our neighborhood. So India needs to be wary of where and how China will try and needle us. China's apparent abhorrence towards the Quad is also of concern. China has often spoken of out of turn when it comes to the Quad and raised questions of why this grouping exists in the first place. So even as we see that key bilateral between President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Modi take place, as far as resetting or rebooting of ties between the two countries is concerned, is it going to be advantage India? We decode that.
ब्रिक्स विश्व की 40% मानवता और लगभग 30% अर्थव्यवस्था का प्रतिनिधित्व करता है। यह संगठन वैश्विक चुनौतियों का सामना करने के लिए और अधिक प्रभावी माध्यम बनकर के उभरेगा। हमारी विविधता और मल्टीपोलैरिटी में हमारा दृढ़ विश्वास हमारी ताकत है।
Let's open this up. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is in Kazan. He's meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping. That bilateral is underway as we speak. We'll soon be getting pictures and perhaps a sense of what the two leaders are discussing. But why is this important? What India stands to gain out of this? Manju Seth, former diplomat, joins us on this broadcast to decode that. Retired Colonel S. Dini, former CEO of Infantry Battalion in Pangong Tso area, is with us as well. And an expert on Chinese affairs, Jennifer Zhang, is with us as well. As far as the LAC is concerned, which is why I want to get in Colonel Dini in first, we've seen the kind of overtures that China has made on the eastern front, both in eastern Ladakh and even in Arunachal Pradesh on multiple occasions. Now we're seeing a deal on disengagement that is finalized. But can China be trusted? Because we're yet to know what nitty-gritties are of this deal that are yet to come out.
Ma'am, yes, definitely. The past history, shows that there have been instances where Chinese have gone back on whatever they had agreed and leading to a lot of mistrust. But as of now, what we see is definitely post the 2020 clash, there has been a steady, I would say that desire from both sides to bring to as fast as possible a normalization along the line of actual control. In that sense, this particular agreement, which was brought out day before yesterday, that the remaining areas wherever the troops were in close proximity, the disengagement will now take place, followed by patrolling to those points as was done in April 2020. So I find it's a positive thing. We have to be careful going ahead. There is a lot of work yet to be done for complete normalization along the line of actual control. But I feel that there is there is much more transparency as far as issues goes, because of what has happened before. whatever in April 2020. Now, when this agreement is being implemented on ground, it will be verified and then again verification, followed by then going step by step ahead. So yes, definitely there is a trust deficiency. There's no doubt, but I think the way forward is that we have to move with that trust deficiency. We cannot do away with that, but we have to move ahead so that normalcy and peace and tranquility can be restored along the line of actual control.
A mutual trust coming in from both sides, because that is what seems to be lacking both at the military level and at the diplomatic levels. In the last 5 years, we've seen that there is a lot there's a lot of water that has flown under the bridge, but can we look beyond it? Can we go back to the camaraderie perhaps that both leaders had 5 years ago? Because China walking the talk on sticking to its agreements is very, very important to this deal holding up. Jennifer Jain?
Yes, sorry. I think to your question, can China be trusted? I think that answer is no matter what, it's a definitely no. Because if you look at this Chinese Communist Party's history, it never stick to its words or to its agreement. Even especially with Hong Kong, it says it's a historic document. Even when Deng Xiaoping claimed that we will keep the Hong Kong's democracy or their way of life for 50 years, but only after 20-some years. Hong Kong is now become a totally inland center, like an inland city, like all other Chinese centers. Of course, why the CCP is currently seem like making some concession to India? I think number one, India has been very firm in its dealing with the CCP. I think that is a great way to deal with the CCP. Never be threatened or intimidated by it. And of course, I think if you look at the bigger picture, the CCP currently is under great pressure, even internationally and domestically. So maybe the CCP is just doing this to solve its own or to ease its own pressure. But as soon as its pressure is eased or anything changes, it can go back to its old ways. It needs to show the Chinese people it is tougher. It's a tougher leader. So for the Chinese people to follow them. And sometimes, of course, there is competition between these two in terms of population, biggest country in the world, and in terms of different value system. So the CCP always want to convince the Chinese people that China's model of governance is better than India. So in that way, it will always regard India as a threat and an embarrassment to the CCP. So because of this, I think, very basic value system, whether you choose democracy or dictatorship, if this does not change, India could always be seen as the CCP as something not really to be on a friendly term, because the existing and especially the development of India itself poses a threat to the CCP's model of governance.
Manju said, then, is that a double-edged sword as far as India is concerned? Because A, we already have the track record and that China is known to make unilateral changes, and B, if there are really under pressure internally, like Jennifer was also pointing out, they would want to put on a more upfront of bravado, want to try and be more belligerent in front of their own political, in front of their own domestic audiences for their political gains. Wouldn't then that be worse for India to ensure that China does keep its end of the bargain?
Absolutely, it's going to be a big challenge. While this is to be welcomed that this arrangement has been agreed to. But yes, we cannot trust China and how much it will agree, because now, agree on the ground to rectify the situation. We are in a difficult spot at the moment. Yes, agreement for the arrangement has been reached, but how will they implement it on the ground? Will they move back? What will they do? Will they allow full access again to the Indian side for for patrolling rights? They've said we have agreed to it, but we don't know to what extent it will be implemented on the ground, especially by the Chinese side. Given that they have a history of seeing, of committing and then seeing whether they want to go ahead with it or not. Because I think they perceive it in their interest to keep India or sort of on the, to keep needling India, as you rightly said in the beginning. They like to do that so that, India does not, and as Jennifer also said, they do not want to send a message. They want to send a message to their people that India cannot be better than us. Their growth model, they cannot match us. They cannot match our might, our economic clout, etc. But yes, right now there are economic issues within the country. Externally, China is facing quite a lot of problems. So they would like, and also their, their sort of so-called debt diplomacy around the world, the BRI projects, etc. All of them are not doing so well. There are some sort of obstacles coming in the way. They were expecting everything would happen very quickly, but it hasn't gone the way that they planned. So I think they're all these factors, and of course India putting some kind of restrictions on their investments and on trade. All these factors have played a role in China rethinking its approach to this long-standing issue. And of course, the many rounds of diplomatic and military talks that have gone on over the last few years, all that has resulted in some kind of resolution, finding a resolution to this issue, and we hope that it will be implemented. But yes, we have to be cautious. We have to approach this with a very careful kind of, a careful kind of welcome, should I say, and see if we can, ensure that it's more long term. But I'm not sure it will be very long term. We cannot say, because if China decides that it's not in their interest to go ahead with it fully, they will do according. They will, take action accordingly. So I think India has to be very careful and cautious with the agreement, and restoring trust with China is going to be a little difficult given the past history. But I think China might want it to be trusted. So let's see if it's how its actions are in the coming months.
Also, having India on its side, Jennifer, would be important for China as well. We are seeing there is a different kind of regrouping or different kind of realignment that's happening worldwide. India is also sending the message that, it's not just the West, but we have friends elsewhere, and we're not scared to use them when it comes to putting India's interests first. So having India on China's side is also important for China to try and put out a message to the world that there is a possibility that there could be realignment that is not dominated by the West.
Of course, I think the establishment of the BRICS itself is some kind of another organization opposed to what is existing or dominated by the West. I just read this Xi Jinping's full speech at the BRICS meeting. So I think in his speech, he emphasizes we want a peaceful BRICS, we want a green BRICS, we want innovation, and this and that. He also talks about they were established 10 overseas learning center, and to provide the opportunities to 1,000 educational whatever staff for the training. I think, of course, at in terms of the current situation and the challenge the CCP is facing, to have a stable relationship with India will, of course, do it good. The trade, in recent years, because of the tension, the trade between India and China has been decreased. And I think this, of course, from the trade issue, it will want to increase. And more importantly, I think the dominating issue for the CCP and especially for Xi Jinping is Taiwan, and also the relationship with Russia. And so it was revealed that the CCP, Russia, and North Korea has reached some kind of secret agreement for the North Korea to send 100,000 special troops to assist Russia in its battle with the Ukraine. The CCP were going to equip to provide all military gears for this 100,000 North Korea soldiers. So for the CCP, the big picture is it wants to keep the war between Russia and Ukraine going, and also it wants to keep the U.S. busy in the Middle East. That's why it has been assisting Hamas, Hezbollah in Middle East. So to keep the U.S. busy, so it can, when it decided to take on or attack Taiwan, it has the opportunity to win that war immediately, so that the Xi Jinping can gain his forever leadership in the party, and that's and also to bring China into a war status could be the only solution they see for its all kind of crisis inside China. So to achieve this dominating goal, I think a stable relationship, especially a peaceful relationship with India, is important to China, so they don't have to face a double war in both sides of China.
Absolutely. And as far as the LAC is concerned, Colonel Denny, this is just one aspect of it. This is the 1D of the 3 Ds that we want to focus on. Disengagement is what is the deal that has been agreed upon. We're still yet to get details of what exactly that entails, because we know that patrolling rights have been granted to both sides, but till what point do we go in that patrolling? Because that is something that China had also unilaterally tried to change. But the other 2 aspects, as far as de-escalation and de-induction or demilitarization is concerned, is that going to be a long road ahead? Or do you think now that we're seeing bilateral ties at the highest levels with President Xi Jinping meeting Prime Minister, that could be fast forwarded as well?
Ma'am, I do believe that it will take some time for the complete normalization of the situation along the line of actual control. As you rightly mentioned, that this is the first step. The disengagement process would be completed at the last remaining 2 friction points of Depsang and Danchok after this agreement, which was reached day before yesterday. Now, after that, yes, there has to be de-escalation which has to take place. For that, patrolling and such like confidence building measures has to be taken on ground along the line of actual control. And simultaneously, or maybe after that, there will be a de-induction process which will take place. And then probably we can, take a realistic assessment or make a realistic assessment that now, yes, the things have normalized. But till that time, it is, situations, it will be very difficult to predict that everything will be smooth, because we have seen that, okay, this area we have now taken care of, but the entire border with India, with China is something which is, has always been, there is a dispute somewhere or the other. So sometimes it could well happen that in some other area, something else can come up. So we have to be very cautious. And I think that is fairly understood at the tactical level, at the ground level, that whatever we do with China, we have to be extra cautious, because they say something, they do something, all those things are there. But I think today we are much more better placed, I would say, along the line of actual control, because last 4 years, the kind of infrastructure development, the kind of force build-up which we have been able to do, gives us the confidence to take on any situation. So I think that is one of the important factors due to which China today agreed to pull back. So given the condition in which we are, it will take some time for complete normalization, but I think the process is well on its course.
The wheels have been set in motion, at least as far as getting those ties back on track are concerned, Manju Seth. And we are seeing the Prime Minister meet President Xi Jinping after 5 long years. But these are 2 leaders that shared a certain kind of camaraderie and rapport. The Prime Minister has made multiple visits to China, 5 if I'm not mistaken. He's an Indian politician, Indian Prime Minister, who's made the maximum number of visits to China. And we've seen President Xi Jinping being welcomed here in India as well. That kind of rapport, is that something you think these 2 leaders can go back to after what's happened in the last 5 years?
No, I don't think it will be back to that level. But yes, there can be a thaw in the ties and a little more friendly ties, let me say. But I don't think they can go back to that level because, as they say, once bitten, twice shy. India would be very, very careful about getting back to the same level of camaraderie and that closeness that we had with China, because we don't know. Now I think it happened with our former Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru also many years ago. You know, when suddenly after saying everything was okay, they attacked us in 1962. So it's a little, China's mindset has always been a little different, and we can't always take them at face value, and we cannot be sure that what they will do exactly what they say, because sometimes they do, sometimes they do not. And again, as I said, it's they perceive their self-interest in doing so. They think that's the way they need to conduct their international relations, their foreign policy, and they feel that needling India, keeping India a little bit, putting India down so it doesn't sort of have any sort of competition and does not compete with China. I think that is one of their aims as well. But yes, as things are evolving, rapidly changing, the geopolitical situation is changing, shifts are taking place. They're also recalibrating and rethinking their relationship. You know, with Russia, they had, there was literally a cold war between the two countries for many years. They've got back together now. And, so things can change. It's an evolving situation. No permanent friends, no permanent enemies, as they say. So I think it may not get back to that same level, at least in the near future. But we cannot be sure if things evolve and things change. Given that the kind of challenges that that India faces and all countries are facing at this point of time, when the situation will change and how things will be recalibrated, we cannot say. But I'm not sure it will get back to the same level that it was at before.
Once bitten, twice shy, but there's hope and there seems to be a thaw in ties. There is seemingly a mend as far as the two countries are concerned. We hope that continues, especially after this bilateral meeting between the two leaders. What we're learning is that the bilateral in Kazan between President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Modi has just concluded. We'll get more details coming out. But as we get you those details, I want to get in Jennifer Zheng in as well. You know, as far as the Chinese side is concerned, we've discussed what their domestic compulsions may be. But why is it that we see this kind of flip-flop, so to say? Because there is, on one hand, they want to try and put this front of bravado. On the other, it looks like China has blinked or has been the first one to blink as far as this instance goes.
I think its domestic challenge is too much. There's also another possibility. There has been always rumors for the past several months that Xi Jinping suffered a stroke during the third plenary mission, and that after that he got some setback or got some pushback from other forces in the party, and so they are gradually trying to fade him out of Chinese politics. So that's why you see some kind of softened status in some of international affairs and as well as domestic policy. But those are all, of course, just rumors. I think in terms of its official media rhetoric about relationship with India. Just before this interview, I checked the Chinese media. One, they didn't report anything about this upcoming talk with Modi. And if I search on Baidu with the keywords BRICS and India, all the articles come up about a very anti-India either reports or commentators, and all blaming India as want to dominate BRICS or want to push their agenda into this BRICS. So all very hostile articles against India. So I think at this stage, China's internal politics is at a very unstable stage. So we do have to watch very closely as to what happened. As the other two guests said, we can't take anything out of China on the just face value. There could be a lot of other things going on underneath the black box operation of the Chinese politics.
I request all three of you to stay on with us. These are visuals that are coming in from Kazan in Russia, where the bilateral meeting between the two countries, between President Xi Jinping of China and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, has just about concluded.
दोनों की मुलाकात की तस्वीरें और दोनों नेताओं के बीच ये मुलाकात रूस के कजान शहर में हुई है। दोनों नेताओं के बीच
A firm handshake there right before the bilateral meeting began. We see the two leaders sit down with their teams on both sides. Several issues were...
to meet you in Kazan. It's the first time for us to have a formal meeting in 5 years' time. Both the people in our two countries and the international community are paying great attention to our meeting. China and India are both ancient civilizations, major developing countries, and important members of the global south. We are both at a crucial phase in our respective modernization endeavors. It best serves the fundamental interests of our two countries and two peoples, for both sides to keep to the trend of history and the right direction of our bilateral relations. It's important for both sides to have more communication and cooperation, properly handle our differences and disagreements, and to facilitate each other's pursuit of development aspirations. It's also important for both sides to shoulder our international responsibility, set an example for boosting the strength and unity of the developing countries, and to contribute to promoting multipolarization and democracy in international relations.
我愿同总理先生就两国关系和共同关心的问题交换意见。
Mr. Prime Minister, I'm prepared to exchange views with Your Excellency on our bilateral relationship and issues of mutual interest.
Excellency, आपसे मिलकर खुशी है और जैसा आपने कहा 5 साल के बाद हमारी फॉर्मल मीटिंग हो रही है। हमारा मानना है कि भारत और चीन के संबंधों का महत्व केवल हमारे लोगों के लिए ही नहीं, लेकिन वैश्विक शांति, स्थिरता और प्रगति के लिए भी हमारे संबंध बहुत अहम है। एक्सेलेंसी, सीमा पार पिछले 4 वर्षों में उत्पन्न हुए मुद्दों पर बनी सहमति का हम स्वागत करते हैं। सीमा पर शांति और स्थिरता बनाए रखना हमारी प्राथमिकता रहनी चाहिए। म्यूचुअल ट्रस्ट, म्यूचुअल रिस्पेक्ट और म्यूचुअल सेंसिटिविटी हमारे संबंधों का आधार बने रहना चाहिए। आज इन सभी विषयों पर बात करने का अवसर मिला है। मुझे विश्वास है कि हम खुले मन से बातचीत करेंगे और हमारी चर्चा कंस्ट्रक्टिव होगी। धन्यवाद।
तो दोनों नेताओं के बीच ये मुलाकात हुई है रूस के
remarks of both those leaders there before the bilateral. The Prime Minister making it very clear that what's transpired at the line of actual control in the last 4 years needs to be amended. We welcome the step that has been taken as far as disengagement at the line of actual control is concerned. Mutual trust and respect is required. Mutual sensitivity is also key to ensure that there is stability at the line of actual control, was a clear message that the Prime Minister sent out during that bilateral meeting. Several other issues, of course, did come up, but the situation at the line of actual control is one that focus is going to be on, because that is going to decide the course of what else is discussed and the outcome of everything else, because this, of course, is going to be of topmost priority. Relations between India and China needs to be stable, not just for the two countries, but also for global peace, is what the Prime Minister said. Let's listen into that comment once again.
एक्सेलेंसी, आपसे मिलकर खुशी है और जैसा आपने कहा 5 साल के बाद हमारी ये फॉर्मल मीटिंग हो रही है। हमारा मानना है कि भारत और चीन के संबंधों का महत्व केवल हमारे लोगों के लिए ही नहीं, लेकिन वैश्विक शांति, स्थिरता और प्रगति के लिए भी हमारे संबंध बहुत अहम है। एक्सेलेंसी, सीमा पार पिछले 4 वर्षों में उत्पन्न हुए मुद्दों पर बनी सहमति का हम स्वागत करते हैं। सीमा पर शांति और स्थिरता बनाए रखना हमारी प्राथमिकता रहनी चाहिए। म्यूचुअल ट्रस्ट, म्यूचुअल रिस्पेक्ट और म्यूचुअल सेंसिटिविटी हमारे संबंधों का आधार बने रहना चाहिए। आज इन सभी विषयों पर बात करने का अवसर मिला है। मुझे विश्वास है कि हम खुले मन से बातचीत करेंगे और हमारी चर्चा कंस्ट्रक्टिव होगी। धन्यवाद।
That was the Prime Minister there, unequivocally mentioning the line of actual control and the ties between the two countries, hinging on the fact that the situation at the line of actual control must be stable, and for that, mutual trust, mutual respect and mutual sensitivity is of utmost importance. Manju Seth and Colonel Dinny continue to be with us. Manju Seth, if you heard both the comments that came to the fore, it's interesting the kind of comments that came to the fore from Xi Jinping. But Prime Minister Modi was very clear. We want to talk about one subject and everything else will follow based on how you respond to that. And that's bettering situations at the LAC and ensuring that there is mutual trust and respect coming in as far as the LAC situation is concerned.
Absolutely. And he put it very clearly and I think unambiguously, and that is a very positive development in our bilateral ties, where we are able to very clearly convey our concerns, convey our views. And for the Chinese, yes, they will talk always of other things, but yes, mutual trust, respect, I think that is very, very important in any relationship. And that was sort of undermined by the Chinese side in the last so many years, and especially in 2020. So I think it has been very clearly, and I think they've understood also, maybe, and they realize that yes, India is not the India of, so many years ago of the 60s when India got, it cowed down and it said, okay, it doesn't matter. And, we allowed China to have to get away with many things. But now I think we want to talk to them, if not on an equal footing, at least from a position of strength. China also wants to talk from a position of strength, I think, and they want to convey to India very clearly that, we are the stronger nation, the bigger partner. You cannot, you cannot, get away with what you want. So they are trying to put that messaging first. They want us to understand that. And I think we want them to understand that we would like to speak at an even level, at the same level, and to first establish trust and respect, and to also to respect each other's sensitivities. It should not be a one-way street. Both sides need to do that. And while India tries to be very, it tries to be aware of their sensitivities at everywhere where, wherever we are in all other multilateral forums, China unfortunately has not shown the same degree of concern for India's sensitivities. But we hope that after this meeting, at least to some extent, but as I said, it cannot be in the long term. We cannot trust China in the long term. But yes, I think in the immediate future, there is a possibility that they will be